Chapter 1693, Stay Here. Chapter 1693, Stay Here. Chapter 1693, Stay Here. Heaven's burial lost. How did it happen so quickly? Falling Fire was stupefied when he heard Daybreak Fog's final sentence. He simply could not fathom how such an outcome had occurred. Heaven's Burial had sent over 300,000 players and 100,000 evil demons to siege Stone Forest Town. The army had even included 5 mythic-ranked monsters. With such a force, even capturing a guild city should be a problem, much less a guild town. Furthermore, the battle at Stone Forest Town had begun and ended in less than half an hour. Even killing 400,000 common monsters would take more time than that, yet he had just learned that Heaven's Burial had lost in such a short time. No matter how he thought about it, he simply couldn't bring himself to believe Daybreak Fog's claim. Moreover, Singular Burial had confidently assured him that they could last another 5 minutes, but only 3 minutes had passed since that conversation, and the battle was over. For a moment, he even wondered if Singular Burial was toying with him. However, with how much Heaven's Burial had riding on this battle, Falling Fire doubted that Singular Burial would make such a joke. If Singular Burial were really joking, only Heaven's Burial would suffer for it. Should we retreat? Qin Muyun, the woman beside Falling Fire, asked. She wore a suit of silver plate armor and carried a buckler engraved with divine runes. No. How can we possibly just leave after spending all of that time and effort to get this far? Even if Heaven's Burial is heavily wounded, Zero Wing shouldn't fare much better. Let's go and take a look. If there is a chance of victory, we can use the opportunity to capture Stone Forest Town, Falling Fire said, shaking his head. Moreover, we have the advanced magic array, Magic Dragon's Descent. Mythic evil demons and beasts can't compare to the magic dragon. Not even a city's defensive magic array can last more than a few hits against it. Capturing Stone Forest Town will be child's play. Qin Muyun nodded her agreement. This time, their superiors had instructed them to show Zero Wing and everyone else in God's domain the consequences for provoking Blackwater. Although Heaven's Burial's swift defeat had been a surprise, it was not exactly impossible. The majority of Heaven's Burial's evil demon army consisted of recently spawned demons, which still sorely lacked strength. Meanwhile, Heaven's Burial's player army only had around 170,000 elite members, while the rest were normal guild members. As for the guild's experts, Heaven's Burial had only dispatched around 5,000 due to the losses the guild suffered in Ancient Rock City. On the other hand, Blackwater had dispatched over 6,000 experts and 10,000 elite players. In addition, the army had 5 Tier 2 experts, Falling Fire, Laughing Drunkard, Lethal Gale, First Ghost, and Qin Muyun. With their arrangement of 1 Tier 2 Shield Warrior, 2 Tier 2 Berserkers, and 1 Tier 2 Assassin, they could offer the support to allow Falling Fire to display the full strength of a Tier 2 Elementalist. In contrast, Heaven's Burial only had 3 Tier 2 players, and there wasn't a single MT among them. They had also brought with them 8 catapults. Even if they had to face 2 or 3 mythic monsters, they had a high chance of victory. Falling Fire and Blackwater's forces immediately increased their pace toward Stone Forest Town. After running for nearly 1 minute, the army arrived at the top of a slope some distance away from Stone Forest Town. However, as Falling Fire began to organize his troops and advance on the town, he heard the sound of a massive explosion. The forest ahead of him trembled with the force of the explosion, and after a moment, a towering pillar of light destroyed the blast's surrounding terrain. Pitch-black fire devoured the nearby trees in the blink of an eye, leaving only cinders behind. When the light pillar faded, Falling Fire's team spotted a 50-meter-tall evil earth dragon laying in the ashes. The evil earth dragon's HP had already reached 0, and its entire body had burned to black. Deep cuts scored the evil earth dragon's entire body, with some so deep that one could even see the mythic monster's white bones. Several hundred of these deep gouges decorated the evil earth dragon's form. Blackwater's members gasped when they saw this corpse's miserable state. The light pillar had also killed hundreds of evil demons and players. However, that wasn't the worst part. Despite these players clearly being dead, their translucent souls still occupied the battlefield. Meanwhile, these souls were in agony as the pitch-black flames continued to burn them. Seeing this, ordinary players might not realize what was happening, but the large guild's upper echelons and experts understood very well. This was a soul attack, and any player the attack killed would lose more than just one level. It was very likely that these players wouldn't be able to log back into God's domain for some time. Meanwhile, 3 gigantic figures stood beside the evil Earth Dragon's corpse. Each of these figures was 30 meters tall, and they all held crimson longswords in their right hands, the blades of which were wrapped in pitch-black fire. Once they saw their prey's corpse, the 3 Baphomets split up and charged at the nearby evil demons and Heaven's Burial members. Every time the Baphomets swung their swords, dozens of evil demons and players lost their lives. None of these evil demons or players could withstand a single hit from the high demons. The 3 Baphomets were like demon gods as they slaughtered the evil demons and Heaven's Burial members. Only the half HP mythic evil beasts could hold off a high demon for any length of time. However, despite only one Baphomet facing off against the 2 remaining mythic evil beasts, the latter lost HP rapidly. It was only a matter of time before they died. Falling Fire and the others wore somber expressions as they watched this scene. The 3 level 80 mythic ranked high demons even overwhelmed the evil Earth Dragons. Before these monsters, players were a joke. Falling Fire finally understood why Heaven's Burial had been defeated so quickly. How is Zero Wing so powerful? Falling Fire was greatly confused as he watched the 3 Baphomets slaughter Heaven's Burial's forces. Obtaining one such powerful monster was already extremely difficult, yet Zero Wing had command of 3 of them. Not even super guilds were capable of such a feat. Blackwater's members. Shifeng, who stood some distance behind the Baphomets, quickly noticed the spectating crowd on a distant hillside. "Since you're here, you should stay here forever." Saying so, Shifeng instructed 2 of the Baphomets to charge at Blackwater's army. The Baphomets he had summoned had a very short duration of 5 hours. Since Blackwater's forces had already arrived, he didn't mind taking them out. Fortunately, Heaven's Burial was no longer a threat to Zero Wing. He could finish off its members after taking out the larger threat, Blackwater's forces. "Damn it!" Falling Fire shouted. Watching the 2 Baphomets dash towards them, Falling Fire could easily guess what Shifeng had in mind. Immediately, he commanded, "Summon the magic dragon. Activate the defensive magic array." Agreeing with Falling Fire's decision, Qin Muyun notified the players responsible for the 2 magic arrays. She had already witnessed the Baphomet's strength. If 2 of these monsters were allowed to charge into Blackwater's ranks, the consequences would be unimaginable. The only way to stop the 2 approaching high demons was to summon the magic dragon and use their defensive magic array. Suddenly, a colossal, silver magic array appeared in the sky. A moment later, a dragon covered in pitch-black scales and silver runes manifested before Blackwater's army. Magic Dragon Clan, High Inferior Dragon, Mythic. Level 75. HP 420 000 420 000. The magic dragon's aura was visibly stronger than that of ordinary mythic monsters. It could basically rival a mythic-ranked archaic species of the same level. The level 80 evil Earth Dragons simply couldn't compare to this monster. This was also why Falling Fire was confident in capturing Stone Forest Town despite Heaven's Burial's defeat. When the magic dragon joined the battlefield, 100 players in Blackwater's army spread out along the army's edges before activating a defensive magic array. A magic barrier then formed and enveloped the army. A moment after Blackwater's army deployed its offensive and defensive measures, the 2 Baphomets reached the army like a powerful gale. One of the 2 Baphomets then leaped into the air, transforming into a blur as it arrived before the magic dragon. The high demon then swung down its crimson long sword, and the weapon tore apart space as it moved down towards the high inferior dragon's head. Although Cland tried to block the attack with one of its claws, it was repelled the moment its claw met the blazing, crimson long sword. The crimson long sword then proceeded to smash into the magic dragon's head and slam it straight toward the ground, the resulting impact carving out a huge crater in the earth below. Meanwhile, the other Baphomet arrived before Blackwater's defensive magic array. As the high demon raised its long sword, the pitch-black flames along the blade flared. As the Baphomet commanded, A raging pillar of black fire descended on Blackwater's magic barrier. When the flames met the barrier, the attack formed a massive slice across it. Smaller, web-like cracks began to spread out around the cut, crawling across the entire magic barrier. Chapter 1694, One Hit to Destroy a Magic Array. Chapter 1694, One Hit to Destroy a Magic Array. Chapter 1694, One Hit to Destroy a Magic Array. In the dense forest some distance away from Stone Forest Town, under Singular Burial's command, Heaven's Burial's members had scattered and fled into the forest. By doing so, more members would escape with their lives. Zero Wing's members could only operate within the movement-type defensive magic array, and only the 3 Baphomets were truly capable of giving chase. Why are Blackwater's people here? Daybreak Fog, who maneuvered around the forest, was confused to see Falling Fire's group on a distant hillside. Have they lost their minds? They actually came. She had clearly told Blackwater not to come and to regroup at the barrier's exit. They'd only stand a chance against Zero Wing once they combined their forces. Foolish. Absolutely foolish. How can Blackwater employ such fools? Singular Burial could not help but curse out loud when he saw Falling Fire's distant figure. He had already gotten a taste of Zero Wing's true strength. He had hoped to regroup with Blackwater's army and the evil demon army guarding the barrier's exit before resuming their battle against his hateful enemy. However, the fools from Blackwater had refused to listen to his advice and continued towards the battlefield. If Zero Wing decimated Blackwater's forces now, this war was as good as over. Heaven's Burial would lose all hope of capturing Stone Forest Town. Before Singular Burial could contact Falling Fire and demand an explanation from the foolish elementalist, he noticed 2 of the rampaging Baphomets leave the battlefield and charge straight for the hillside Blackwater's army resided on. Seeing this, Singular Burial fell into a thorough despair. However, before the 2 Baphomets had reached Blackwater's army, a mythic-ranked magic dragon descended from the sky. Despite such a vast distance between him and the high inferior dragon, Singular Burial could feel the horrific pressure the monster gave off, and he couldn't help but shudder. Layer after layer of translucent magic barrier enveloped Blackwater's entire army. In the blink of an eye, a triple barrier had formed to protect the army. At a glance, one could easily tell that the triple barrier was the product of a high-ranked defensive magic array. Guild leader, Blackwater seems to be taking Zero Wing seriously this time. They've even used 2 of their trump cards. Based on our information, those 2 magic arrays were rewards Blackwater obtained after completing an epic main storyline quest. The guild had to expend a lot of resources and manpower to complete it, Daybreak Fog said, slightly surprised to see the 2 magic arrays that had formed around Blackwater's forces. The summoned magic dragon should have the power to rival a mythic-ranked archaic species of the same level, and the defensive magic array is an advanced magic array. It can block even Tier 4 attacks with ease. With those 2, we might stand a chance against Zero Wing. Some of Heaven's Burial's upper echelons breathed a sigh of relief when they heard Daybreak Fog's explanation. Singular Burial's eyes shone with joy. If they had a mythic-ranked archaic species on their side to fight with their forces and the 2 remaining evil Earth Dragons, they should be able to keep Zero Wing at bay for quite some time. Once the other evil demon army arrived, it might even be possible to suppress the 3 Baphomets. Moreover, the Baphomets wouldn't be able to clash their armies for some time with the advanced defensive magic array to protect them. They could then use the opportunity to bombard Zero Wing's defensive magic array with Blackwater's 8 catapults. Zero Wing's defensive magic array wouldn't last long against them. As Singular Burial prepared to order his scattered forces to regroup with Blackwater, something unbelievable occurred. One of the 2 Baphomets that had assaulted Blackwater's army had sent the level 75 magic dragon crashing, face first, into the ground with a single attack. Meanwhile, the other Baphomet released a powerful strike against Blackwater's defensive magic array. Although the triple barrier did not fall, cracks webbed the entire barrier. For a moment, the world seemed to have fallen silent. How is this possible? Even Falling Fire and his Blackwater companions were dumbfounded, not to mention Singular Burial and his upper echelons. Their eyes bulged as they stared at the damage. A monster that rivaled a mythic-ranked archaic species had been thrown, face first, to the ground. A mythic ranked archaic species was practically invincible to current players. However, that wasn't what shocked them most. The Baphomet's ability to damage an advanced defensive magic array's barrier so severely with a single attack was unbelievable. Falling Fire and the other Blackwater members even wondered if the system had tricked them, awarding some cheap knockoff. What Falling Fire and the others did not know was that a high demon was a demon with a noble lineage. High demons were akin to emperors among demons, and their life ratings were even higher than archaic species. Only dragons and ferocious beasts could hope to triumph over a high demon. Furthermore, Shifeng's Baphomets had been reinforced with the Bible of Darkness. Their strength was far higher than the mythic-ranked magic dragons, and in a frontal clash, it was only natural that the Magic Dragon clan had lost. The advanced defensive magic array was indeed capable of blocking a normal Tier 4 attack, but the attack Baphomet had used had been a Tier 4 taboo skill. Including the Bible of Darkness's buff, the Tier 4 taboo skill could rival a Tier 5 attack, which was already far beyond the defensive magic array's endurance limit. It's not broken. What a powerful defensive magic array. Shifeng was slightly surprised as he watched Blackwater's defensive magic array slowly mending itself. He had never thought that Blackwater could acquire such a powerful advanced magic array. However, Falling Fire and his companions were truly shocked. Not only had Baphomet's attack severely damaged their defensive magic array, but the players maintaining the magic array had also lost 1/3 of their mana pools. Unlike Zero Wing's movement-type defensive magic array, which was machine-operated, their players had to maintain their magic array. Hence, the energy needed to mend and maintain the array came from the player's mana. If even one of these players ran out of mana, the magic array would stop working and disappear. Players could only rely on mana recovery potions to replenish their mana stores. However, mana recovery potions had considerably long cooldowns, and they only restored a small amount of mana. Meanwhile, after seeing its first attack failing, the Baphomet attacking the defensive magic array promptly followed up with another Tier 4 skill. Although the skill was no match for a Tier 4 taboo skill, it still drained a significant amount of mana from the players maintaining the magic array. Meanwhile, the other Baphomet continued to bombard the magic dragon, pushing it back and tearing one pained cry after another from the monster. At this point, Falling Fire snapped out of his daze and hurriedly commanded, "Attack! Fire the catapults!" The players controlling the catapults immediately aimed and fired at the Baphomet attacking their magic barrier. The catapults were extremely powerful, and with normal ammunition, their attacks had the power of Tier 4 strikes. If loaded with special ammunition, the war weapons attacks would reach the peak of Tier 4. These attacks could even heavily injure mythic monsters, and their only downside was their long, 2-minute cooldown. Suddenly, 8 gigantic, flaming boulders flew towards the Baphomet attacking the defensive magic array. Just before one of the flaming boulders, decorated with divine runes, struck the high demon, the latter lightly swung its crimson longsword. Boom! The moment the edge of blade met the flaming boulder, Baphomet was forced to take 3 steps back as a damage of over -100,000 appeared above its head. However, the clash had failed to inflict any negative effects, such as a temporary numbing. Following which, Baphomet rapidly brandished its long sword to strike down the rest of the incoming boulders, one after another. Each time it blocked an attack, it was forced to retreat several steps, and the Baphomet only stabilized itself after taking a few dozen steps backward. How can a monster be so powerful? Regret gripped Falling Fire's heart as he watched the Baphomet only lose a little over 1 million HP after receiving all 8 attacks. Why had he so foolishly rushed over here? Before Falling Fire could snap out of his daze, the targeted Baphomet advanced and assaulted the defensive magic array again. The players maintaining the magic array continued to lose mana, and although Falling Fire and his players tried to retaliate, the high demon simply shrugged off their attacks. Retreat! Retreat with the magic array! We cannot remain here any longer, Falling Fire shouted anxiously, his expression somber. Although he hated to admit it, even a fool could tell that only death awaited them should they continue this battle. Their wisest option was a quick retreat while the defensive magic array still stood. Although moving the magic array would significantly deplete its energy, it was better than standing here and doing nothing. Don't even think you can flee that easily. When Shifeng saw Blackwater's army began its retreat, he immediately commanded Anna to use angel summoning. A moment later, a Valkyrie with white feathered wings descended onto the battlefield. A Valkyrie's life rating was even higher than a high demon's, but how much strength the summoned Valkyrie could exhibit largely depended on Anna's basic attributes. Fortunately, Anna had already activated yin-yang power, which allowed the Valkyrie's combat power to reach a height like never before. The Valkyrie's two sets of wings shuddered slightly before she vanished from where she stood. A second later, she reappeared before Blackwater's army, radiating a horrific aura that was even stronger than the two Baphomets. Suddenly, a spear of thunder formed in the Valkyrie's hand before she tossed it at Blackwater's magic barrier. Peng! 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 3 crisp sounds echoed throughout the forest as a hole formed in the 3 incomparably powerful protective barriers. The spear then struck one of the players maintaining the array before it exploded. Boom! Countless arcs of golden lightning scattered, devouring everything in its path. Any players this lightning touched were vaporized instantly. With just one attack, the Valkyrie had killed over 500 Blackwater members. Meanwhile, the advanced defensive magic array could no longer operate as it lost one of its operators, and it began to fade out of existence. Staring at the Valkyrie before him, Falling Fire's expression became more solemn than ever before. When Singular Burial and the other Heaven's Burial members saw this from within the forest, horror flashed in their eyes. With one attack, the Valkyrie had destroyed an advanced defensive magic array that could even stop a mythic ranked monster's attacks. Chapter 1695 Heaven's Burial Crumbles. Chapter 1695 Heaven's Burial Crumbles. Chapter 1695 Heaven's Burial Crumbles. When the triple barrier Blackwater's advanced defensive magic array had created began to fade, the various major powers members, who watched the battle through magic water mirrors, expressed their shock and horror. The 3 Baphomets Shifeng had summoned were impossibly strong. But even one of their full-powered attacks had only cracked the defensive magic array's outermost barrier. On the other hand, the Valkyrie had destroyed the entire defensive magic array with one attack. If the Valkyrie were used to siege a guild town or city, just thinking about it made them shudder. It was entirely possible that the Valkyrie would only need one attack to break a city's defensive magic array. Just how many secrets has Zero Wing hidden? Singular Burial was nearly traumatized as he watched Blackwater's defensive magic array crumble. Countless guilds dreamed of wielding the power to destroy a city's defensive magic array. Breaking a city's defensive magic array was, after all, the most important part of trying to capture a city. When Shifeng had destroyed ancient rock cities' defensive magic arrays, he had chalked it up to the man finding some precious treasure, and a treasure like that would only have limited uses. Once the usage counts were exhausted, the treasure would disappear. Yet, Shifeng had replicated that feat with a summoned Valkyrie one of his personal guards controlled. This had an entirely different meaning than summoning such power with a consumable. The Valkyrie had been called with a skill, which meant that Zero Wing could summon the monster indefinitely, only limited by the skill's cooldown. Sure enough, that Valkyrie is really powerful. The fact that the Valkyrie had destroyed an advanced defensive magic array even surprised Shifeng. However, he doubted that the Valkyrie could destroy a city's defensive magic array. At the very least, she'd need to use more than one attack. An advanced defensive magic array, which players had to maintain, and a city's defensive magic array were two very different things. A player-maintained defensive magic array had the advantage that it could be deployed at any given time. However, its flaws were obvious. First, there was the problem of mana consumption. Second, no harm must come to the players maintaining the magic array. Otherwise, the magic array would crumble. Although the Valkyrie's full-powered attack had pierced a hole in Blackwater's defensive magic array, it had failed to destroy the magic array entirely. The attack had merely drained a considerable amount of mana from the maintaining players. The attack had only destroyed the barrier because it had killed a few of the players maintaining it. This wouldn't happen with a city's defensive magic array. At most, the Valkyrie's attack would deplete some of the magic array's energy. Meanwhile, since Blackwater's army had lost its defensive magic array's protection, it had no way to deal with the high demon before it. Each time Baphomet swung its crimson long sword, it reaped the lives of over 100 players. After the players died, Baphomet's soul fire continued to burn their immortal souls. In the blink of an eye, Baphomet had killed over 1,000 players. Falling Fire's heart bled when he saw this. Blackwater had dispatched 20,000 players to capture Stone Forest Town, 6,000 of which were guild-nurtured experts. It was one thing if these experts died, but if their immortal souls were damaged, they'd be prevented from logging into God's domain for several days. This would be a massive loss for the guild. With no better choice, Falling Fire could only follow Heaven's Burial's example and order a retreat, telling his men to scatter. Only one Baphomet had targeted the force, and even if the High Demon were very fast, it could only kill a limited number of players if everyone ran in different directions. Seeing this, Shifeng sneered and waved a hand. Suddenly, hundreds of miniature ballistas launched their exploding arrows at Blackwater's members, each arrow containing power at the peak of Tier 2. When Blackwater's members saw the volley of arrows rain down on them, they felt their scalps tingle. After a series of explosions, the hillside became a barren wasteland covered in small craters and scorched earth. Although Blackwater's members had responded to the volley very quickly, over 2,000 players had died in the first wave of arrows. The miniature ballista's effect was wondrous. Watching volley after volley of exploding arrows rain down on his forces, Falling Fire turned to flash Shifeng a chilling glare as he fled. His forces had suffered a tragic loss. Against the several hundred miniature ballistas' continued bombardment and the High Demon's pursuit, he'd be lucky to leave this battlefield with less than half of his original army if they escaped at all. Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's forces continued to scatter, running all the way to the Sealing Barrier's single exit. Naturally, Shifeng ordered his guild members to chase the two guilds down, leaving scorched earth and corpses in their wake. As they watched Zero Wing's members chase hundreds of thousands of players relentlessly, the crowd in Stone Forest Town was stupefied. Ruthless. Zero Wing was utterly ruthless. This was the crowd's evaluation of Zero Wing. Normally, after one side won a guild war, it would only chase its enemy for 10 or so minutes if it wanted to exploit its victory. Chasing the enemy players for any longer than that could lead to unnecessary losses, yet Zero Wing ran after Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's members for over half an hour, hunting the two guilds' forces to the Sealing Barrier's exit. In the end, Zero Wing had slaughtered every mythic evil demon and mythic evil beast Heaven's Burial had sent to the Stoneclaw Mountains. The guild didn't even spare the mythic monsters that had guarded the Sealing Barrier's exit. All evil demon above Lord rank had been annihilated as well. Meanwhile, Zero Wing suffered 0 casualties throughout this entire battle. If they told other players of this battle, those players would likely assume they were either joking or bragging. However, such a miraculous battle had indeed occurred before them. 3 Baphomets guarded the exit of the barrier, sealing off the Stoneclaw Mountains, preventing anyone from leaving the map. Any player or evil demon that tried to approach the exit was killed or sent flying. No one was allowed past these high demons. Black Flame. Don't go too far. Singular Burial bellowed as he glowered at Shifeng, who stood within Zero Wing's movement-type defensive magic array. The Sealing Barrier's exit wasn't particularly large. Normally, 10 or so evil demons was enough to block it off completely. The Baphomets with their gigantic frames easily guarded the exit, and with their outrageous strength, Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's forces had no hope of leaving the Stoneclaw Mountains. Their forces could only watch as Zero Wing's miniature ballistas slowly approached. Black Flame, we have lost. We have already chosen to retreat from the Stoneclaw Mountains. By trying to exterminate us all, do you intend to fight Blackwater until the bitter end? Falling Fire demanded as he glared at Shifeng. Going too far. In an indifferent tone, Shifeng responded, not only have your two guilds worked together to target Zero Wing time after time, but you've enclosed the Stoneclaw Mountains in a barrier to kill our members back to level 0. Did you not consider that your actions were a bit much? If I let you off the hook so easily today, what will other guilds think of Zero Wing? Thus, I invite every one of you to stay with us. Saying so, Shifeng waved his hand, and hundreds of exploding arrows rained down on Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's remaining members. Boom! 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 A series of explosions echoed throughout the valley. With no power to fight back, Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's members could only run and scatter. Good. Very good. Black Flame, you forced me to do this. Singular Burial descended into madness as he watched one of his guild's experts and elites die after another. Since Heaven's Burial is finished, Flame Blood, detonate Beast Emperor's evil energy magic array. I want the map to become a graveyard. We'll drag Zero Wing to hell with us. Shortly after Singular Burial issued the command, runes began to appear above the Stoneclaw Mountains. The evil energy within the map went berserk, gathering in the array Beast Emperor had previously constructed. The earth trembled as the terrifying power concentrated. It felt as if Armageddon had come to the Stoneclaw Mountains. Lunatic. Falling Fire cursed when he heard Singular Burial's crazy plan. The man was going to drag him to hell as well. Because of this turn of events, Zero Wing's members wore somber expressions. They could all feel the horrific power concentrating at the gigantic magic array near the exit of the sealing barrier. If the magic array exploded, the consequences would be dire. Die. Singular Burial began to laugh maniacally when he saw the fear on Zero Wing's faces. Once the magic array was set to detonate, it would transform everything within a 5,000-yard radius into a land of dead. Moreover, evil energy would corrupt players' souls after they died in the explosion. Even if some players survived, evil energy would contaminate their being, and they'd suffer a weakened state. Players that died would also suffer a weakened state. This weakened state would relent until players removed the evil energy from their bodies, which would take a considerable amount of time. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the air. It was none other than Shifeng, who had used a blink scroll. Once in the air, Shifeng pointed Killing Ray at the magic array collecting evil energy. Then, a pitch-black barrier formed, enveloping the array and gradually dissipating the gathering mana and evil energy. Forbidden Domain. Without the support of external mana, the magic array couldn't self-destruct. Don't think that you can die so easily while you stand before me, Shifeng growled as he charged into the evil energy-filled magic array. Evil energy was incredibly toxic to ordinary players, and at high concentrations, it could even kill players upon contact. However, the moment Shifeng entered the magic array's range, he activated Absolute Domain, becoming immune to all forms of damage. After setting foot in the magic array's range, the golden, divine runes surrounding Shifeng began to crackle as they fought off the surrounding evil energy's corrosion. What powerful evil energy! Shifeng couldn't help his surprise when he noticed the evil energy begin to corrode the divine runes. His absolute domain could even stop Tier 4 mythic monsters' attacks, yet this magic array's evil energy slowly, but surely corroded the skill. The power of the concentrated evil energy here nearly had the power of a Tier 5 spell. Not even ordinary mythic monsters would dare approach this magic array with such power. Only evil beasts and evil demons had any hope of survival within it. The evil energy's corrosion increased as time passed. Not daring to waste any more time, Shifeng charged toward the center of the magic array and slashed at the staff there with one of his blades. Thunder flame explosion. Boom. When the lightning and fire collided with their target, the staff inserted into the ground shattered, leaving only a dark gray crystal covered with purple-gold runes behind. When the core of the magic array shattered, the array began to vanish. Following which, the sound of a system notification reached Shifeng's ears. Chapter 1696, Shaking Starmoon Kingdom. Chapter 1696, Shaking Starmoon Kingdom. Chapter 1696, Shaking Starmoon Kingdom. System. Congratulations. You have successfully destroyed the evil god's sealing magic array and stopped an evil energy passage from opening. Rewarding 100 humanity reputation points and 10,000 war gods temple merit points. Shifeng was slightly surprised when he heard the system notification. He had never expected to earn 100 humanity reputation points and 10,000 war gods temple merit points for just destroying a magic array. War gods temple merit points were extremely valuable. With 4,000 points, one could purchase an ordinary epic item from the temple. However, Shifeng did not spare the matter much thought as he snatched up the runic crystal and dashed away from the magic array. Although the magic array had already been destroyed, the evil energy it had gathered still lingered in the area. Once the evil energy ate through Absolute Domain's protection, not even a Tier 2 player like himself could survive the concentrated energy. Meanwhile, outside the magic array, Singular Burial, who had truly gone mad, was stupefied when he noticed the magic array disappear. Flame Blood, who controlled the evil demons from a hidden location, also gaped in shock. How is that possible? The color in Flame Blood's face drained when he noticed the gathered evil energy in the magic array gradually dissipate. Is he really a player? The ceiling magic array Beast Emperor had used to entrap the Stoneclaw Mountains was extraordinary. The evil energy inside the array had become so dense after sacrificing 400,000 players that not even an evil god's apostle like Flame Blood dared to enter its range. Any player not belonging to the evil god's temple would seal their own fate if they approached the magic array. Yet, not only had Shifeng survived inside it, but he had also destroyed the magic array. Although the silencing skill Shifeng had used prevented the magic array's detonation, that was only temporary. Once the silencing skill's duration ended, Flame Blood could simply detonate the magic array again and transform this map into a cemetery. However, now that the magic array had been destroyed, that wasn't possible. Due to the magic array's destruction, the barrier over the Stoneclaw Mountains map lifted. As a result, the blue sky returned as every player watched. Communication with the outside world also became possible again. The seal has lifted. How is this possible? Did Heaven's Burial win? Quick! Notify the higher-ups. The various large guilds members, who were stationed outside of the barrier, were surprised when the pitch-black magic barrier around the regional dungeon suddenly disappeared. They immediately contacted their superiors. However, before they could report the situation, a large number of players burst out of the other end of the valley as terrified as if they had just seen a ghost. These fleeing players wore either Heaven's Burial's emblem or Blackwater's. A moment later, another large group of players charged out of the Stoneclaw Mountains. Although the second group had fewer players than the first, the second group's momentum was imposing. These players fiercely hunted down Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's fleeing members. What's going on? Why are Zero Wing's members the ones pursuing Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's members? Shouldn't it be the other way around? Did Heaven's Burial and Blackwater lose? That shouldn't be possible, right? Those two guilds sent in so many players, and they had the help of their evil demon army. How could they possibly lose? The spectating players had never even considered the possibility that Zero Wing would defeat Heaven's Burial and Blackwater. The evil demon army was simply too strong. It wasn't a force current players could defeat. Furthermore, Heaven's Burial and Blackwater far outnumbered Zero Wing. Capturing Stone Forest Town would be a piece of cake for these two guilds. How could they possibly end up running away from Zero Wing? Moreover, Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's members fled with such desperation. Before these players could think of a proper explanation, 3 30-meter-tall, humanoid monsters charged out of the valley ahead. Every one of these humanoid monsters radiated a horrific aura, and as they left the valley, they chased after Heaven's Burial and Blackwater's players. Each time they swung their crimson longswords, they took the lives of dozens or even hundreds of players. Nobody could stop the three monsters' rampage as screams echoed throughout the valley. When the spectators took a closer look at the Baphomet statistics, they couldn't help but shudder and gasp. Mythic monsters. However, before they could recover from their shock, they noticed translucent figures hovering above the players' corpses. Pitch-black fire burned these translucent figures, and a sense of dread overwhelmed the spectating players. Ordinary players might not recognize this phenomenon, but guild players like them were no strangers to the scene. Evidently, the Baphomets used soul attacks, and any players they killed with the attack would suffer more than a single lost level. Meanwhile, there were 3 of these monsters. Quick! Report this to the higher-ups, some of the players who reacted quickly shouted. News of the barrier around the Stoneclaw Mountains lifting quickly spread to Starmoon Kingdom's various large guilds. And it wasn't the only news they received. Battle videos of the heaven-defying fight that had occurred outside of Stone Forest Town also found their way into the upper echelon's mailboxes. These videos clearly displayed the full development of the war between Zero Wing and Heaven's Burial. Despite these upper echelons' experience in numerous field battles, team battles, and even guild wars, when they watched the fight outside of Stone Forest Town, they couldn't help but be dumbfounded. Watching Shi Feng resist Heaven's Burial's war weapons was particularly mind-blowing. No player had ever done anything like it, yet Shi Feng had achieved the feat effortlessly. The strength and defense he displayed were simply unheard of. In addition, the guild's upper echelons watched the 3 Baphomets annihilate the Mythic Evil Demon and 4 Mythic Evil Beasts, and one Tier 3 or Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell fall on the battlefield after another. Seeing several hundred miniature ballistas fire their arrows as one was also spectacular. Overall, the battle had completely transformed the terrain outside of Stone Forest Town. Guild experts had been little more than ants in the battle, unable to accomplish anything. In the Star Alliance's residence in Star Moon City. So, Heaven's Burial has been defeated. Galaxy Past revealed a bitter smile when he received news of Zero Wing's victory. Now, no one in Star Moon Kingdom can stop Zero Wing. Guild leader, did you predict that Heaven's Burial would lose from the very beginning? Purple Eye asked curiously. Based on Galaxy Past's tone, he didn't seem surprised by this war's outcome. No, I didn't know, but I had a feeling that Zero Wing wouldn't lose. The guild has performed many miracles since its establishment, and there's nothing surprising about it performing one more, Galaxy Past said, shaking his head. However, Zero Wing's performance this time did surpass even my expectations. Despite facing such a powerful force, it still won so effortlessly, even killing over 200,000 Heaven's Burial members and 15,000 players from Blackwater. The various superpowers following the war between the two guilds were shocked when they learned of its outcome. Zero Wing. They still had such a trump card. It's no wonder why the guild rejected our kind-hearted offer. Yuan Taishin paled as he watched the 3 Baphomets in the video before him. High demons. He had only read about this type of demon in the libraries he had visited. High demons were emperors among demons. Their life ratings were even higher than archaic species, yet Zero Wing had summoned 3 of these high demons. It was only natural that Heaven's Burial had lost. After this war, Star Moon Kingdom's various major powers, as well as those operating in secret within the kingdom, realized that Zero Wing had grown past its status as a fledgling guild. Now, Zero Wing's development in Star Moon Kingdom was truly unstoppable. The guild had proven its foundations to join the ranks of the various superpowers and compete for hegemony in God's domain. Shi Feng had returned to White River City with the loot he had obtained from the Mythic Evil Demons and Mythic Evil Beasts. He hadn't stayed in the Stoneclaw Mountains to participate in the cleanup battle. Heaven's Burial's main force was already finished, and Blackwater had lost over 80% of the experts it had dispatched. Baphomet's soul fire had even claimed many of them. Once the resurrected and could log back into the game, they'd be essentially crippled for a considerable time. From today onward, neither of these 2 guilds would find any success in Star Moon Kingdom. In fact, Heaven's Burial might even have trouble continuing in the game at all. After returning to White River City, Shi Feng retrieved his latest bounty, looking through the items with shining eyes. This was especially true when his gaze fell on the dark grey crystal covered in runes. When he had picked the crystal up earlier, he had still been surrounded by dense evil energy. He hadn't had the time to inspect his harvest properly. Now, however, he could feel how frightening this dark grey, runic crystal truly was. The concentrated energy within was astonishing, even surpassing the mana within 7 luminaries crystals. Comparing a 7 luminaries crystal's energy levels to this dark grey crystal was like comparing a candle flame to a forest fire. It felt as if this single crystal contained the power of an entire world. What is this thing? Shi Feng muttered curiously as he inspected the item. Chapter 1697, Miniature World. Chapter 1697, Miniature World. Chapter 1697, Miniature World. When Shi Feng tried inspecting the dark grey crystal, the result he got was simply a bunch of unknown. In fact, he didn't even get the name of the crystal. It can't be inspected. Shi Feng grew even more curious upon receiving this result. He immediately activated omniscient eyes and appraised the crystal. Aside from weapons and equipment, cases where an item could not be inspected were rare. In such rare cases, the reason for such an outcome was either a frightening origin or damage beyond repair. After Shifeng activated omniscient eyes and used them on the dark grey crystal, a loading bar appeared before him. 22 seconds. What an amazing item! Shifeng's eyes glowed with excitement when he saw the time needed to appraise the crystal. Normally, even epic items needed only a dozen seconds or so to appraise. For the crystal before him to need 22 seconds, this proved that the crystal was much more valuable than even epic items. However, after giving the matter some thought, Shifeng found it reasonable. An item capable of serving as the core of the magic array that sealed the entire Stoneclaw Mountains naturally couldn't be an ordinary item. Even the defensive magic arrays used to protect cities required an extremely strong power source to operate. A barrier that could seal a map as large as the Stoneclaw Mountains would need an extremely frightening amount of energy. Finally, after 22 seconds had passed, the attribute panel of the dark grey crystal was no longer filled with unknown. Evil God's Eye. This is an item created by the evil god for the specific purpose of opening up a path through a world's barrier. The inside of the evil god's eye contains a sealed miniature world. The evil god's eye can be used as a conduit to transfer the power of the entire miniature world to the outside world. However, as the conversion equipment has been damaged, the evil god's eye is no longer able to supply any power to the outside world. There's a miniature world inside this thing. Heaven's Burial really is generous to actually use such a treasure to seal the Stoneclaw Mountains. Shifeng was dumbstruck after reading the evil god's eye's introduction. It was no wonder he couldn't inspect the item before. It was only natural for him not to be able to inspect the information of a miniature world using normal means. As far as Shifeng knew, miniature worlds were extremely rare in God's domain. Only the ancient gods could create items with miniature worlds sealed inside them. Meanwhile, items containing miniature worlds all possessed extraordinary power. Moreover, if players controlled an item containing a miniature world, they could enter said miniature world anytime they wanted to. Although miniature worlds were no match for other worlds in terms of size, they were roughly similar existences. However, owners of miniature worlds had complete control over them, unlike other worlds, and could harvest the resources inside the miniature worlds at their leisure. Other worlds, on the other hand, required players to manually obtain the resources they wanted. Of course, miniature worlds did not possess as many resources as other worlds did. Controlling a miniature world was akin to gaining control of an ore vein. Players could harvest various kinds of rare resources periodically from the miniature world they controlled. Meanwhile, the most precious resource one could obtain from a miniature world would be power ore. Power ore was an excellent support material produced by concentrating the energy of the entire miniature world. Typically, a support material that could increase the forging success rate of dark gold equipment by 5% would already be considered a miraculous item. However, power ore boosted the forging success rate of dark gold equipment by around 5% to 10%. In addition, the forged equipment would gain the energy protection passive effect with 100% certainty. As for weapons produced using power ore, they would gain the energy strengthening passive effect with 100% certainty. The energy protection effect passively increased the tolerance of equipment, making the equipment less likely to get damaged by powerful attacks and reducing the loss of durability. Meanwhile, the energy strengthening effect performed roughly the same function as energy protection. It decreased a weapon's chances of suffering wear and tear when striking at tough opponents or blocking powerful attacks. Players might not find these effects particularly useful during the early stages of God's domain. But at higher levels, these effects would start to become important because the more players fought against powerful monsters, the more frequently they would come across monsters capable of severely damaging weapons and equipment. It might be fine if the weapons and equipment players used were of high quality, but those at fine gold rank and below could end up a pile of scrap after going through a battle against a powerful monster. Due to this reason, as players reached higher levels, their thirst for high-ranking weapons and equipment would likewise become increasingly greater. It was also due to this reason that, in Shifeng's previous life, The market had never become saturated with weapons and equipment in the 10 years of God's domain's operation, because even epic items could be destroyed. Hence, the various large guilds had actively nurtured their own lifestyle players in the past. This was especially true for lifestyle players capable of producing weapons and equipment. The further guilds progressed into the game, the greater their need for weapons and equipment. During the later stages of the game, guilds even had to prepare multiple sets of weapons and equipment for their members when raiding powerful bosses or fighting large-scale battles with other guilds. Since weapons and equipment made with power or lost durability at a much slower rate, guilds could save up on plenty of coins and materials. In the past, any power ore sold on the market would be bought almost immediately, so long as the price was reasonable. The various large guilds had also expended a ton of effort on the acquisition of power ore. Unfortunately, power ore was extremely rare. In fact, the continent of God's domain didn't produce power ore. Players could obtain power ore only from miniature worlds and certain unstable otherworlds. Hence, the various large guilds had constantly contested over otherworlds that produced power ore. As for owning a miniature world that could provide a stable supply of power ore, this was something that most guilds could only dream of. As far as Shifeng knew, only a few super guilds and super first-rate guilds had managed to get their hands on a miniature world. Due to their ownership of a miniature world, these guilds had performed much better at raiding team dungeons and field bosses than other guilds. Thus, now that Shifeng had discovered a miniature world sealed inside the evil god's eye, how could he possibly not become excited? In fact, he even wanted to thank Heaven's Burial right now. If not for Heaven's Burial sealing off the Stoneclaw Mountains, he would never have gotten his hands on such a valuable item. Had Heaven's Burial offered to trade the evil god's eye for Stone Forest Town, Shifeng might even have accepted the offer. All that trouble just to capture Stone Forest Town would have been unnecessary. However, had Heaven's Burial truly known the value of the evil god's eye, the guild definitely wouldn't have done something as foolish as using it as a power source for a magic array. I wonder if the War God's Temple can repair this thing? Shifeng muttered to himself as he looked at the crystal in his hands. Although the evil god's eye was damaged, it was not irreparable. It should be possible for the War God's Temple, which was familiar with the evil god's temple, to repair the evil god's eye. After thinking up to this point, Shifeng stored the evil god's eye and started looking through the other items he obtained from the war. The loot dropped by the mythic evil demons and mythic evil beasts was considerably good. 2 pieces of epic growth-type equipment dropped this time, a top for magical classes and a pair of boots for MTS. The rest were level 70 plus dark gold and fine gold equipment. To current players, these things were still too high-leveled and useless for now. Aside from weapons and equipment, the mythic monsters also dropped an evil god crystal, which was an unexpected harvest for Shifeng. In addition, he had obtained over 10,000 evil energy crystals from all the lower-ranked evil demons his summoned creatures and Zero Wings members had killed. If he sold all these evil energy crystals, he could definitely make a huge fortune. However, Shifeng had no intention of selling these evil energy crystals. Instead, he planned to use them to upgrade the evil god's tablet. It was only the existence of the evil god's tablet that allowed Zero Wings Battle Arena in Stone Forest Town to have advanced combat rooms. Meanwhile, these advanced combat rooms were the reason behind the popularity of Stone Forest Town's Battle Arena among expert players. Unfortunately, the evil god's tablet had a limited AoE, supporting the operation of only a few advanced combat rooms at a time, which limited the attraction the Battle Arena held for expert players. If Shifeng could increase the number of advanced combat rooms, then Stone Forest Town's Battle Arena would become more attractive to expert players. Consequently, Zero Wing could recruit more expert players. Now that he had 10,000 evil energy crystals, he could definitely afford to upgrade the evil god's tablet. Following which, Shifeng stored some of the weapons, equipment, and materials he acquired in the guild warehouse and used a guild transfer scroll to teleport to Stone Forest Town. Chapter 1698, Upgrading the Evil God's Tablet. Chapter 1698, Upgrading the Evil God's Tablet. Chapter 1698, Upgrading the Evil God's Tablet. Starmoon City, Stone Forest Town. After Zero Wing's big battle with Heaven's Burial came to an end, shock filled the whole Starmoon Kingdom. Nobody had expected such an outcome. In this battle, not only was Heaven's Burial defeated, but the guild's entire main force was practically crippled. Many of Heaven's Burial's members couldn't even log into God's domain right now. As for Blackwater, it, too, had suffered miserable losses. With the addition of this new battle record, Zero Wing's fame and prestige in Starmoon Kingdom reached unprecedented heights. Every major power operating in Starmoon Kingdom, whether in the light or in the dark, now held Zero Wing in intense awe and fear. Setting aside the 3 Baphomets Zero Wing summoned, just the combination of several hundred miniature ballistas and the movement-type defensive magic array made Zero Wing a frightening force to reckon with. In terms of war weapons, no guild in Starmoon Kingdom could compete against Zero Wing. Now that Heaven's Burial had suffered such a miserable defeat, most likely no guild in Starmoon Kingdom could pose a threat to Zero Wing. Inside the guild hall of Zero Wing's residence, a bright flash appeared at Residence's teleportation point. After the light vanished, Shifeng's figure took its place. At this moment, the guild hall was very lively. Many of the guild's new generation reserve elite members could be seen lining up excitedly in the quest area, waiting to pick up a guild quest. These new generation reserve elites were players that left their respective beginner towns not long ago and passed the guild's entrance test. Although they were only level 20 on average, they all possessed considerably good talent. Among them were some gifted youths. Taking a glance, Shifeng even noticed a few players who had been famous Apex experts in Starmoon Kingdom during his previous life. For example, Shadow Chaser was one of the top 10 assassins of Starmoon Kingdom. There was also Bloodrain, who was one of the top 20 oracles in the kingdom. And then there was Luo Yi, a druid who had managed to get promoted to Tier 4. These were all talents that the various large guilds desperately sought to recruit in the past. Yet, now, these talents had all chosen to join Zero Wing. The war this time is really amazing. It's a pity that I'm too low-leveled to join. Hopefully, I'll get to join in a battle of such scale in the future, a male youth clad in grey mage robes said as he watched the video of the previous war being played in the guild hall, a hopeful expression on his face. It won't be that easy to get selected for such a large-scale war. At the very least, you'll have to get promoted into an elite member to have a chance. The bunch of us are only reserve elites right now. It'll take a lot of effort to become an actual elite member of the guild. Just accumulating the required GCPs is already plenty difficult, not to mention passing the promotion test, a robust man geared in metal armor said, shaking his head. Reserve Elite was a position granted to players that the guild deemed to have potential. However, a person's potential did not necessarily represent their strength. If Reserve Elites failed to hit the growth requirements set by the guild within a certain period of time, they would be demoted to normal members and would have to climb their way back up in the guild. Moreover, as Zero Wing's influence in God's domain increased and more players chose to join the guild, the bar for elite members would also be raised. After all, the guild had a limited amount of resources. Not everybody could enjoy bountiful resources. Only the guild's elite and expert members had the qualifications to reap such benefits. That's no problem at all. Right now, the only advantage the guild's elite members have over us is that they joined the guild earlier than we did. With enough time, even becoming a member of the guild's main force won't be a problem. A teenage girl with an oval face and a graceful body clad in black leather armor said with a grin on her face. She turned to look at Shifeng's figure displayed in the battle video and added, "Just you all wait. Sooner or later, you'll be able to see my figure standing beside the guild leader. You're dreaming too much. Why don't you take a look and see who's standing beside the guild leader?" Commander Firedance and Vice Guild Leader Aqua Rose are both experts who can go toe-to-toe with even the peak experts of super guilds, someone in the crowd around the teenage girl retorted. Only, as soon as this person said so, he was immediately given a fierce glare by the teenage girl. These reserve elites did not rein in their volume when they spoke. Even ordinary players standing several dozen yards away could hear their conversation clearly, let alone Shifeng, a player who possessed an extraordinary physique. However, Shifeng simply chuckled in regard to the conversation of these reserve elites. He had never thought that his existence would spur guild members to improve themselves. Nonetheless, after taking a look at these reserve elite members, Shifeng felt that there was a need to expand the guild once again. Previously, due to Zero Wing's shallow foundations and funding problem, the guild could afford to make only a limited number of reserve elites. After the war with Heaven's Burial, though, that was no longer a problem. Setting aside the items Zero Wing obtained from the evil demons killed, just the weapons and equipment the guild got from killing Heaven's Burials and Blackwater's members were already enough for several mass recruitments. Meanwhile, during the next expansion, Shifeng planned to lure in experts from neighboring kingdoms as well. After all, the scale of the war between Zero Wing and Heaven's Burial had been massive. Not to mention, Heaven's Burial was the previous ruler of ancient Rock City. Hence, the players of Starmoon Kingdom weren't the only ones that had paid attention to the war. Even players in neighboring kingdoms knew about it. Now that Zero Wing had thoroughly crushed Heaven's Burial, the players in the neighboring kingdoms would naturally try to get a better understanding of Zero Wing. Meanwhile, he could use this opportunity to recruit a bunch of elite and expert players to increase the guild's strength and growth potential. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng messaged Aqua Rose and had her send some people to carry out his orders. As for himself, he made his way to Stone Forest Town's battle arena. After the war with Heaven's Burial ended, peace and stability had returned to Stone Forest Town. As a result, the number of players gathered at Stone Forest Town was continuously increasing. Among the players visiting the town, there was no lack of guild experts and independent experts. After watching the battle between Zero Wing and Heaven's Burial, everyone had realized one thing. And that was the fact that even players could go up against war weapons, but sufficient strength was needed to do so. Meanwhile, if they wanted to improve their strength, getting promoted to Tier 2 was undisputedly the fastest method to do so. However, aside from needing good weapons and equipment, sufficiently high combat standards were also necessary to clear the Tier 2 promotion quest. Training at Stone Forest Town's battle arena was undoubtedly the fastest way to improve one's combat standards. Although training at the Trial Tower was also an option, not everybody could afford the fee of 1 magic crystal per attempt. By the time Shifeng entered the battle arena, its lobby was already overflowing with players. Many experts belonging to the various large guilds could be seen arranging matchups with each other. There were also players hosting private duels or competitions with attractive rewards. However, out of all the available attractions inside the battle arena, the advanced combat rooms were no doubt the most popular. The reason for this was the advanced combat rooms' facilitation of improvement in players' skill completion rates. The higher one's skill completion rate, the stronger their skills would become. This could be said to be the most intuitive way for expert players to raise their strength. However, as there were simply too few advanced combat rooms available, despite Judy, the NPC Shifeng had tasked with the battle arena's management, having already raised the rental fee to 4 magic crystals per 30 minutes, demand for the advanced combat rooms still exceeded the supply. When Shifeng took a look at the battle arena's earnings report, he discovered that most of the magic crystals the battle arena earned came from the advanced combat rooms. The popularity of the advanced combat rooms far exceeded Shifeng's expectations. He waited for the current batch of players using the advanced combat rooms to come out, then closed the advanced combat rooms temporarily and retrieved the Evil God's tablet. Immediately after he did so, a commotion occurred inside the battle arena. What's going on? Why can't the advanced combat rooms be used? I've waited a long time for my turn. Yet, now that my turn has finally arrived, they're actually not letting us use the advanced combat rooms. Is this a scam? The players waiting to use the advanced combat rooms kicked up a fuss right away. However, everyone received a quick reply from the NPC staffs stating that the advanced combat rooms were undergoing some upgrades and that they needed to wait a short while for the upgrades to be completed. System: detecting more than 10,000 evil energy crystals on your person. Do you wish to spend 10,000 evil energy crystals to further upgrade the Evil God's tablet? Holding the Evil God's tablet, Shifeng was startled to receive the system notification. Previously, he had to manually select to upgrade the tablet. This time, however, the system actually took the initiative to ask him. However, he did not dwell on the matter but immediately clicked agree. Chapter 1699, God's Item. Chapter 1699, God's Item. Inside the quiet storage room, the evil god's tablet began to transform after Shifeng had agreed to feed it 10,000 evil energy crystals. It had only been the size of a washbasin, but it gradually grew into a 3-meter-tall table. The blurry images and divine runes engraved on the tablet also became clearer. As the divine runes and image sharpened, the divine might the tablet radiated increased until Shifeng couldn't even move. It felt as if time had stopped, only sparing his mind. After 10 seconds or so, the divine might the tablet gave off disappeared. The tablet itself had also undergone a massive transformation. The originally dark grey tablet was now silver in color. The ambient mana also gathered around the tablet, increasing the mana density around it until it formed a white mist. This mist gradually spread and enveloped the storage room as a whole. What's going on with the mana? Shifeng was indescribably shocked as he looked at the white mist around him. Normally, mana that was so dense that formed a white mist felt incomparably pleasant to players. Players who bathed in this mana would also feel their minds reach an incredible tranquility. However, Shifeng felt no such effects from the white mist in the storage room. On the contrary, he felt exhausted. In fact, his body even felt heavier as if something was weighing on him. Although Shifeng's mental state was on the verge of crumbling, he mustered his spirit and inspected the evil god's tablet's recent changes. Third fragment of evil god's tablet, fragmented legendary rank item. Active skill 1 - Illusory space, when activated, forms an illusory space of 200-yard radius. The illusory space will create a copy of any player that enters. Players can then fight their own copies. The illusory creature has all skills of the copied player and can achieve a 100% skill completion rate. Players can choose to challenge illusory creatures up to the dark gold rank. Duration, 50 minutes. Cooldown, 1 hour. Can be evolved. Requires 1 evil god crystal to evolve. Active skill 2 - Evil god domain. When activated, create a self-contained field around the tablet that is completely separated from the outside world. Time flows twice as fast inside the field than in the outside world. Mana density inside the field is triple that of the outside world. When Evil God Domain is active, illusory creatures will appear inside the space at fixed intervals. Every wave of illusory creatures killed will increase the mana density of the self-contained field slightly. If players are killed by the illusory creatures, their souls will be damaged, and they will be prevented from logging into God's domain for 6 hours. Can be evolved. Requires 3 evil god crystals to evolve. An item created by the evil god. Evil energy crystals can be used to repair the divine runes inside the tablet. Requires 200,000 evil energy crystals to upgrade. This tablet is amazing. Not even legendary items have this kind of ability. Shifeng was astonished as he read the evil god's tablet's new attributes. The tablet had improved far more than Shifeng had expected. The evil god's domain alone was a godlike ability, not to mention how many more advanced combat rooms he could set up with the illusory space's increased radius. Regardless of how far players progressed in God's domain, environments with high mana density would be quite popular. This was because such environments were a great help when players practiced their combat techniques. Not only did the evil god domain created a mana-rich environment, but it could also accelerate the flow of time. 1 hour inside the evil god domain was only the equivalent of 30 minutes in the outside world. For players seeking to improve their combat standards without wasting too much of their precious time, the evil god domain was the perfect solution. While others spent 10 hours training in the outside world, players could achieve the same results in 5 hours within the evil god domain. If the various superpowers learned about the evil god's tablet, they'd definitely gang up and move against Zero Wing. Plenty of superpowers were already envious of the advanced combat rooms. They only refrained from taking action because the cost wasn't worth the potential gains. However, the evil god domain would certainly be the straw that broke the camel's back. The only downside was the illusory creatures that would appear inside the evil god domain. Based on the skill's introductory text, it was obvious that the illusory creatures would grow stronger. As a result, Players could only train for a limited amount of time in the evil god domain. When players could no longer fend off the summoned illusory creatures, they'd be forced to leave. If they stayed, and the illusory creatures killed them, they'd suffer a huge loss. It seems I won't be able to let the guild's experts use this casually for a short time, Shifeng thought to himself as he reread the evil god domain's introductory text. Zero Wing already stuck out like a sore thumb in God's domain. If he allowed a large number of Zero Wing's experts train in the evil god domain, the news of it would quickly reach the various superpowers. Zero Wing had already grown to pose a threat to them, and it was normal that these superpowers would send undercover experts to spy on his guild. If the various superpowers learned about the evil god domain, Zero Wing would become embroiled in another struggle. The best course of action was only to allow Fire Dance, Blackie, and the guild's other core upper echelons to train in the evil god domain. Any more than that would be too risky. If he wanted all of his guild's experts to use the evil god domain, Zero Wing would have to become strong enough for the superpowers to acknowledge its rights to own the tablet. Unfortunately, gaining that recognition would involve a long, arduous process. However, Shifeng wasn't too disappointed. Although he couldn't let too many experts train in the evil god domain, he'd have no issues constructing more advanced combat rooms. Illusory space already had a 200-yard range. If the evil god's tablet were upgraded further, the skills range would grow. At that time, the skills range might even cover the entire floor. Although such an outcome would also make the various superpowers all the more jealous of Zero Wing, they wouldn't become so envious that they'd resort to cooperation to attack the guild. After all, the various superpowers all possessed extraordinary foundations. They had their own methods of helping their guild experts improve their skill completion rates. Only, those methods might not be as effective as the advanced combat rooms. The next upgrade costs 200,000 evil energy crystals. Shifeng frowned as he looked at the upgrade condition for the evil god's tablet. The cost is certainly getting harsher. Zero Wing had killed nearly 100,000 evil demons to collect 10,000 evil energy crystals. Moreover, the guild had only obtained such a harvest due to the fact that evil demons had a higher drop rate for evil energy crystals than evil beasts. However, players didn't often encounter evil demon armies. Collecting 200,000 evil energy crystals would require an insane amount of time, effort, and resources. Wait, it isn't exactly impossible. Shifeng suddenly remembered Ancient Rock City. At this point, Ancient Rock City had become an evil god's branch temple. Over 3 million evil beasts and evil demons fortified the city. If he could kill every one of those monsters, he should be able to collect nearly, if not more than, 200,000 evil energy crystals. If the various major powers and Beast Emperor knew that Shifeng played with the idea of attacking Ancient Rock City, they would most likely think he had lost his mind. While everyone else did their best to avoid the city, Shifeng actually planned to pick a fight with it. As Shifeng was thinking of ways to deal with the evil god's branch temple, a line of small, bracketed words in the evil god's tablet's attribute panel caught Shifeng's attention. These two skills can be individually upgraded. When Shifeng saw that he could upgrade the skills with evil god crystals individually, he was instantly ecstatic. Although evil god crystals were incomparably valuable, he only had one city that needed a power source. Immediately, Shifeng chose to upgrade illusory space. Suddenly, the evil god crystal in Shifeng's bag transformed into a streak of light that flowed into the silver tablet. In the next moment, the first of the 6 blurry images on the evil god's tablet became clear. The image depicted an ancient god fighting a 9-headed magic snake. The closer Shifeng examined the scene, the more immersed in the battle he felt. This is a tutorial for the realms of truth. As Shifeng continued to inspect the image, his heart began to pound. Chapter 1700, Guild's Foundation. Chapter 1700, Guild's Foundation. Shifeng had already reached the realms of Truth's Ascension realm. Hence, after examining the first image on the evil god's tablet, he was certain that it was a tutorial for the realms of truth. Moreover, the tutorial was extremely detailed that even Shifeng gained a lot of inspiration from it. What kind of treasure is this evil god's tablet? Curiosity filled Shifeng as he gazed at the evil god's temple. There was very little information on the realms of truth available in God's domain. If not for a fortuitous encounter some time ago, he wouldn't have learned about these realms, either. This was just like during his previous life, when he had only known that reaching the realms of refinement could sharpen one's 5 senses and help improve one's skill completion rates and combat technique learning efficiency. However, after grasping the principles behind the realms of truth, he had realized how important these realms truly were. In fact, now that Shifeng had grasped both the realms of refinement and realms of truth, he was confident of defeating 3 or 4 Void Realm experts of the same level simultaneously, even if he didn't have an overwhelming advantage in basic attributes and didn't use any skills or spells. If he said as much to anyone, they'd likely laugh at him for being so overly confident. Most experts would have to flee from a force of 3 or 4 experts of the same realm of refinement, even if their attainment in that realm were higher. Only domain realm experts could take on multiple opponents of the same combat standard. Super guilds were so powerful precisely because they possessed a complete legacy to nurture experts in the realms of refinement. Meanwhile, super first-rate guilds would always remain as super first-rate guilds due to their lack of a complete legacy. This kind of legacy was a guild's foundation. The Evil God's Tablet was one such legacy. Only, instead of being a legacy that passed down knowledge regarding the realms of refinement, it was a legacy that taught the realms of truth. As far as Shifeng knew, no power throughout God's domain had a legacy related to the realms of truth. Hence, one could just imagine how valuable the Evil God's Tablet was. Although the first image on the Evil God's Tablet only taught the realms of truth's basics, which addressed one's own power usage, it was still extremely valuable knowledge. Furthermore, the table had other engraved images. As long as he put in the effort, it was only a matter of time before he restored the other images as well. Once he did so, he might obtain a complete legacy for the realms of truth. Just thinking about the possibility excited Shifeng. If everything turned out how he imagined it, Zero Wing would have the foundation to grow into a super guild. Although this foundation would be different from other super guilds, he did not think that this foundation would be any weaker than theirs. He had yet to find the realms of truth's limits, and no one could tell what kind of heights a player could reach by relying on these realms. Moreover, he had an advantage that the various super guilds did not. He knew how to train in both the realms of truth and the realms of refinement, while the super guilds had only explored the realms of refinement. This could be a considerably massive advantage. After Shifeng finished examining the image on the tablet, he inspected its attribute panel again. Sure enough, this Evil God's Tablet is a treasure to nurture experts. Shifeng's eyes glowed when he read the updated introductory text for Illusory Space. Illusory Space. When activated. Skill Effect 1. Players wielding an evil energy crystal and standing within 10 yards of the Evil God's Tablet shall enter the tablet's image with their consciousness, experiencing battle directly. Each evil energy crystal grants 1 complete experience. Skill Effect 2. Forms an illusory space of 200-yard radius. The illusory space will create a copy of any player that enters. Players can then fight their own copies. The illusory creature has all skills of the copied player and can achieve a 100% skill completion rate. Players can choose to challenge illusory creatures up to the Dark Gold rank. Duration: 50 minutes. Cooldown: 1 hour. Can be evolved. Requires 1 Evil God Crystal to evolve. With this direct experience tutorial, players could get a firm grasp of the principles behind the realms of truth by experiencing the fight between the ancient god and 9-headed magic snake personally, even if they were utterly ignorant of the realms of truth. This training method was many times more efficient than observing the tablet's image. Only, Shifeng hadn't expected the evil energy crystal requirement. However, after giving the matter some thought, he found it reasonable. This was a chance to experience the realms of truth directly. This was far better than watching a video. It wasn't unusual for there to be a cost. It seems that I'll need to prepare more evil energy crystals and evil god crystals. Shifeng could not help but reveal a bitter smile as he gazed at the Evil God's Tablet. Previously, he had still been somewhat skeptical about the saying that fortune and misfortune existed alongside each other in God's domain. Now, however, He believed in the saying completely. Originally, the evil god's temple's arrival should have been a disaster for both Zero Wing and Star Moon Kingdom. Looking at it now, however, Shifeng found that it was an opportunity. Otherwise, he really wouldn't know where to locate so many evil energy crystals and evil god crystals. After all, only evil demons and evil beasts dropped these items. Immediately, Shifeng took out an evil energy crystal and activated illusory space to test out the tutorial. Suddenly, the evil god's tablet released a dazzling purple glow. Shifeng then felt as if his entire being was sucked into the tablet. Following which, the scene before him underwent a heaven-defying transformation. By the time Shifeng realized it, he was standing in the middle of a primordial wasteland. Dark, rumbling clouds covered the sky above him. Meanwhile, before him was a 500-meter-tall nine-headed magic snake, which towered like a mountain that released a boundless aura. The power within its breath could likely kill a Tier 5 existence instantly. Each of the 9-headed magic snake's heads contained a different kind of power. When all 9 powers combined, the resulting power could be akin to a natural disaster. In the past, Shifeng had watched the battles of Tier 6 god-ranked experts, and he doubted that those Tier 6 players would even survive 2 or 3 hits from the 9-headed magic snake. Fortunately, the magic snake's horrific aura didn't affect Shifeng in the slightest right now. He could feel that his consciousness had entered the ancient god that had fought the 9-headed magic snake in the tablet's image. However, although that was the case, he could not move the body. He could only quietly observe and feel the ancient god's actions. Following which, the ancient god started his battle against the 9-headed magic snake. However, contrary to expectations, the struggle wasn't intense. Rather, it was a one-sided beating. The ancient god effortlessly evaded or blocked every attack the behemoth sent. Every move the ancient god executed looked like a profound and complex combat technique. Shifeng was utterly mesmerized by the way the ancient god fought. After 10 minutes or so, the tutorial came to an end. Before Shifeng even realized what was happening, his consciousness left the evil god's tablet and returned to his body. Amazing. So, these are the true realms of truth. Shifeng was at a loss for words. Rhinebeck had acknowledged that he had grasped the basics of the realms of truth, but compared to the foundations the ancient god taught, the basics he had learned were mediocre at best. If he had to score the basics he had discovered and learned himself, they would only earn a passing mark of 60 out of 100. Meanwhile, the ancient god's basics would score a perfect 100. There were simply too many aspects he needed to improve. Although Shifeng wished to experience the tutorial again, he could only experience the tutorial once each time he activated illusory space. He had to wait until the cooldown was over. However, the 1-hour cooldown was too long for Shifeng. He still had many things he needed to take care of. He had no choice but to give up for now. Moreover, he had gained plenty of inspiration from his first visit. It would take him quite some time to digest all of the newfound information. Following which, Shifeng called Judy over to start rearranging the layout of the battle arena's 7th floor. Previously, the evil god's tablet had only had a 100-yard radius. Now, it had increased to a 200-yard radius. The total available area had essentially quadrupled. There was definitely a need to rearrange the floor's layout. After spending around 20 minutes or so deciding on the layout, they ended up squeezing in 40 advanced combat rooms into the evil god's tablet's range. That was more than 4 times of what had been previously available. With this, the battle arena could earn at least 4 times more income from the advanced combat rooms. But Shifeng still wasn't satisfied. He then instructed Judy to increase the advanced combat room's rent, pushing the original cost from 4 magic crystals to 10 magic crystals. Guild leader, I'm afraid that this price far exceeds what most experts can afford. If we go through with this price increase, many experts will give up on renting the advanced combat rooms, Aqua Rose anxiously said when she saw the new price Shifeng offered. Expert players were the advanced combat room's main customers. She had constantly been managing Stone Forest Town's candlelight trading firm and battle arena, so she had a clear grasp of the various experts' daily incomes. The previous price, 4 magic crystals, was already the limit for many experts. If the advanced combat room's rent increased to 10 magic crystals, even the experts from well-known adventurer teams would have a hard time affording it. If that were the case, these expert players would rather train in the Divine Colosseum instead. Don't worry. Limits are meant to be broken. Moreover, the new advanced combat rooms have a duration of 50 minutes instead of the previous 30 minutes, Shifeng said, chuckling. He did not bother to offer any further explanation. The upgraded Evil God's tablet was nothing like it had been. He had experienced this personally. Meanwhile, after the NPC manager, Judy, published the advanced combat room's new rent, the players in the lobby were stunned. 10 magic crystals? Is Zero Wing trying to rob us? Chapter 1701, Hidden Dragon Rises. Chapter 1701, Hidden Dragon Rises. Chapter 1701, Hidden Dragon Rises. Zero Wing sure has guts to demand such a price. Do they really think the advanced combat rooms are the only things that can help players improve their skill completion rates? I can purchase a good piece of equipment or train in the Divine Colosseum 10 times with 10 magic crystals. Does Zero Wing think magic crystals are cabbages? When players saw the updated pricing for the advanced combat room on the large screens in the center of the lobby, many expert players thought that Zero Wing had gone mad for magic crystals. Although current players had far more magic crystal sources now, they could still only earn a limited number. Moreover, there were many other things that required magic crystals. 10 magic crystals simply wasn't a tolerable price for expert players. Players weren't even guaranteed to earn so many after an entire day of hard work. How could they possibly spend all of their earnings on gradually training their skill completion rates? The only benefit was that there were 31 more advanced combat rooms available than before. With this, players would not have to wait in line as long. However, the various major powers experts still frowned on the new change. The advanced combat room's main customers were these experts. Although they could afford the current price, it would be a huge burden on their guilds. Their respective guilds also couldn't afford to send them to the advanced combat rooms as often. It was both unwise and not worthwhile. While fighting the illusory creatures in the advanced combat rooms would indeed help them improve their skill completion rates more efficiently, the higher their skill completion rate became, the less effective the advanced combat rooms were. For expert players like them, the improvement from a single training session wasn't worth 10 magic crystals. Unfortunately, there weren't any good alternatives once players reached their standards. One could say that this change put them in a very awkward position. Hold on a minute, they're updating the advanced combat room's introduction. As everyone discussed the new pricing, the battle arena's main screen revealed the new rules for the advanced combat rooms. First, the duration of each session had increased to 50 minutes. Second, Zero Wing's normal members would get a 10% discount to rent the advanced combat rooms, elite members would get a 20% discount, and core members would get a 30% discount. Moreover, 10 advanced combat rooms would be reserved for guild members. When these new rules were revealed, the crowd in the lobby went into an uproar once again. Meanwhile, the various major powers members turned to Zero Wing's members in envy over the benefits they got to enjoy. With the discounts and extended duration, the rental fee Zero Wing's members had to pay was just slightly higher than before. Moreover, there were now exclusive advanced combat rooms for Zero Wing's members. Suddenly, independent experts started to leave the battle arena, one after another, and make their way toward Zero Wing's residence to apply to join the guild. Even many of the various major powers elite and expert members hesitated. When the other large guilds' upper echelons received news of the update, they paled. Zero Wing actually had such a card to play? With this, Zero Wing's rise really will become unstoppable. Now that Zero Wing had solidified its position as Star Moon Kingdom's #1 guild, there was no longer any local guilds that dared to challenge it. This meant that Zero Wing had a monopoly over the best resources in Star Moon Kingdom. Naturally, its guild members would receive more resources than before. With the introduction of this new guild benefit, Zero Wing became significantly more attractive towards their respective guilds' elite and expert members. It was only a matter of time before their guilds started to lose large groups of their members, yet there was nothing their guilds could do to stop it. For a time after news of the updated advanced combat rooms spread, the number of elite and expert players trying to join Zero Wing increased exponentially. Because of this, Aqua Rose, who was trying to organize Zero Wing's harvest from its war with Heaven's Burial and Blackwater, was ecstatic. In less than half an hour since the new advanced combat rooms had been introduced, Zero Wing had received 20,000 plus applications from ordinary players, 5,000 plus applications from elite players, and 200 plus applications from expert players. Just testing all of these players would take a very long time. The guild's development speed had far exceeded Aqua Rose's initial expectations. Aqua Rose had estimated that it would take Zero Wing roughly 2 or 3 days to recruit so many elite and expert players, but it would seem that Zero Wing might increase its elite member count past 250,000 sooner than that. The guild also shouldn't have any problems increasing its expert member count to 5,000. With such high numbers, Zero Wing would surpass many actual first-rate guilds. The only real difference separating Zero Wing from actual first-rate guilds now was the guild's smaller sphere of influence and fewer normal members. However, this couldn't be helped since Zero Wing's recruitment standards were too high. Moreover, first-rate guilds had begun spreading their influence throughout God's domain the day the game launched. Their influence now covered multiple kingdoms and empires. These first-rate guilds had spent countless resources and an absurd amount of wealth to build a sturdy foundation for themselves. Zero Wing, on the other hand, had begun its development in a single city with little to no wealth or resources. Meanwhile, the effectiveness of the advanced combat rooms promotion effect had also caught Shifeng by surprise. Guild elites and experts were necessary for a guild's development because guilds needed manpower to manage and protect the new territory it acquired. Simply chasing away the local rulers wasn't enough. If a guild lacked the strength to protect its new territory, some other power would eventually capture the territory. In that case, the guild might as well have not bothered to expand in the first place. Currently, Zero Wing was still able to get by with the number of elite and expert members it had since it had very few territories. In total, the guild only controlled 3 towns and 1 city. In comparison, first-rate guilds controlled over a dozen towns that were spread across multiple kingdoms and empires. However, if Zero Wing started to expand, it would naturally encounter more rival powers. If multiple locations were attacked at the same time, Shifeng wouldn't be able to protect all of his territories even if he were more powerful. Hence, a sufficient number of guild elite and expert members was extremely important. As Shifeng ruminated over Zero Wing's future, Gentle Snow suddenly contacted him and asked, "Guild leader, where are you now?" "I'm in Stone Forest Town." "Has something happened?" Shifeng asked curiously. When Stone Forest Town had been attacked, Aqua Rose had led plenty of the guild's experts to reinforce the town. Meanwhile, Gentle Snow had been responsible for assisting the kingdom's armies against the evil beast army that was invading Starmoon Kingdom. Since the evil god's temple's NPCs controlled these evil beasts, not players, they were much higher leveled. The lowest leveled evil beast was level 60, while the majority of the evil beasts were chieftain rank and above. In addition, quite a few tier 3 NPCs from the evil god's temple commanded the evil beast army. If Gentle Snow hadn't led Zero Wing's forces to help the kingdom's armies, the evil beast army would have long since broken past the defensive line. If that happened, the evil beasts would devour every resource in their path, growing stronger as they made their way toward Zero Wing City. The number of evil beasts over here has started to decrease. According to our scouts' reports, Beast Emperor seems to be pulling out the evil beasts and demons under his control. Beast Emperor has sent his monsters to surround the primordial divine ruin. The 2,000 elite members and 100 expert members we stationed at the ruin have been annihilated. Moreover, Beast Emperor has announced that Zero Wing is prohibited from entering the primordial divine ruin from now on. "It seems that we're his only target," Gentle Snow said, gritting her teeth. The primordial divine ruin had already become a prime location for the various large guilds to acquire weapons, equipment, and combat techniques. Most importantly, it was the only entrance to Primordial City. Primordial City was the only place to obtain primordial souls, which could help players complete their Tier 2 promotion quests. If Zero Wing's supply of primordial souls were cut off, its development would definitely fall behind other guilds. By only preventing Zero Wings members from entering the primordial divine ruin, Beast Emperor was clearly trying to provoke the guild. Naturally, the other guilds were more than happy to watch from a distance. Now that Zero Wing had already entered Primordial City and gained an advantage over their guilds, the other guilds wanted to see Zero Wing's members enter the primordial divine ruin even less. Although Gentle Snow wanted to do something about this, the Orc Empire was a neutral map. Even if she notified the kingdom's armies about the evil beasts and evil demons at the primordial divine ruin, the kingdom's armies would not take action. Beast Emperor must really think that no one can touch him just because he's in a neutral map. Shifeng could not help but sneer when he heard Gentle Snow's report, killing intent flashing in his eyes. Since he dares try to cut off my path to fortune, I'll cut off his legs. Chapter 1702, Taking Control of the Lost Town. Chapter 1702, Taking Control of the Lost Town. Chapter 1702, Taking Control of the Lost Town. Although Shifeng had spoken very softly, Gentle Snow could clearly hear the determination and anger in his tone. Guild leader, we aren't really going to take action, right? Gentle Snow grew anxious at Shifeng's words. That Beast Emperor is obviously doing this to lure us over to the Orc Empire. If we really march our army into the neutral map, we will be beyond the kingdom's protection. Those powerful evil beasts and evil demons will tear us apart easily. If we get dealt a heavy blow now, it will diminish the reputation and prestige we've garnered from the previous war. Although Zero Wing had not suffered any casualties during its battle with Heaven's Burial's armies, it had expended a lot of its resources. In fact, Zero Wing's expenditure in the battle had been astronomical. Other guilds might not have a clear idea of how much the battle had cost Zero Wing, but how could she, a vice-guild leader of Zero Wing, not know? Of the 140,000 magic crystals the guild had prepared for the battle, over 120,000 were spent. With the few magic crystals Zero Wing had remaining, going up Beast Emperor's evil beasts and evil demons would be impossible. Meanwhile, once Zero Wing exhausted its magic crystal reserves and lost the protection of the movement-type defensive magic array, the outcome would be horrendous for Zero Wing's forces. Unlike the evil demons that attacked Stone Forest Town, the evil demons and evil beasts Beast Emperor controlled were all level 60 and above. The majority of those monsters were also at the chieftain rank. Even a tier 1 player of the same level might not be able to solo a chieftain-ranked evil beast or evil demon. Not to mention, there were still the stronger Lord, High Lord, Great Lord, Grand Lord, and mythic-ranked evil demons and evil beasts. It might be a different story if Zero Wing could summon more Baphomets as it did during its battle against Heaven's Burial. If that was possible, Zero Wing might have a chance at victory. However, Shifeng had already stated to Zero Wing's upper echelon that he had summoned the 3 Baphomets using a consumable item and used up all the summoning chances during the previous battle. Trying to pick a fight with Beast Emperor while being at such a disadvantage clearly wasn't a wise decision. Of course we need to make a move. Shifeng nodded. In a resolute tone, he continued, moreover, we're going to beat him up badly. He understood Beast Emperor's motives. Currently, Zero Wing was like the midday sun in Star Moon Kingdom. Through the prestige and reputation it earned from the previous war and the attractiveness of the advanced combat rooms, Zero Wing's growth potential was clear for all to see. If Beast Emperor did not take advantage of Zero Wing's current undeveloped state to suppress the guild or even deal it a heavy blow, Zero Wing would definitely become an even greater obstacle for him in the future. Hence, Beast Emperor had dispatched a considerable number of evil beasts and evil demons to surround the primordial divine ruin and prevent Zero Wing from obtaining the resources available there. With this, regardless of whether Zero Wing took action against this blockade or not, Beast Emperor would be able to suppress the guild's development. Most likely, Beast Emperor had already made a thorough investigation of Zero Wing's available combat power. After all, with how large Zero Wing had become, some information about the guild was bound to leak. Meanwhile, if other guilds were faced with Beast Emperor's blockade, they would most likely hesitate over whether to take action against Beast Emperor or not. Unfortunately for him, Shifeng would not hesitate. He might not have any way to deal with ancient Rock City at present, But dealing with the evil demons and evil beasts that had left the protection of the city was not entirely impossible. Notify Aqua and have her gather 1,500 experts at Zero Wing City. It's best if they're trustworthy. It's about time we let Beast Emperor know that the Orc Empire isn't his to monopolize. Shifeng instructed. 1,500 people? Isn't that a little too few? Gentle Snow was a little confused when she heard Shifeng's words. She had thought that Shifeng was planning to mobilize the entire guild to show Beast Emperor who's boss. Yet, now, Shifeng was gathering only 1,500 experts. No, they're more than enough. In any case, have these people gather at Zero Wing City as quickly and as secretively as possible, Shifeng said, revealing a mysterious smile. He then disconnected the call and retrieved the Abyss pendant. Previously, he had used the pendant to record the coordinates of the lost town. Now, he could teleport there directly without having to waste hours going from map to map. Lost towns were towns left behind by ancient civilizations in God's domain. Every one of them was very special. In the past, even the various superpowers of God's domain would fight desperately to claim them. It was naturally best if he secured the lost town in the Boneless Land as soon as possible. Boneless Land, Lost Town. By the time Shifeng arrived back at the lost town, some of the monsters in the town had already respawned. The number was not as high as when he first came to the town, but it was still extremely dangerous for current players to be here. However, he did not dwell on the matter as he activated Gale Domain and flew straight to the bottomless pit at the town center. The bottomless pit looked like a passage that led to a demon's nest. The top of the pit was covered entirely by a magic array with small openings located around the magic array's edges, meant for darkness stones. Shifeng soon arrived before one of the holes and placed one of the darkness stones he collected into it. With each darkness stone he inserted, the opening of the pit shrank slightly. At the same time, though, the pressure coming from the bottom of the pit intensified. Moreover, after he had started inserting the darkness stones into the magic array, an invisible barrier of sorts enveloped the entire lost town, preventing the use of skills, spells, and even magic scrolls. When Shifeng inserted the 10th darkness stone, an angry roar came from the pit. Following which, a level 65, Tier 2 demon appeared before him. As he couldn't use any of his skills or spells at the moment, he had to rely on his basic attributes to defeat the Tier 2 demon. Fortunately, the Bible of Darkness's passive effect still worked, and so the Tier 2 demon had its basic attributes greatly suppressed. Coupled with the fact that Shifeng's basic attributes far exceeded what an ordinary Tier 2 player at his level should possess, fighting the demon was a walk in the park. A few minutes later, the Tier 2 demon collapsed helplessly at his feet. Following which, he continued inserting darkness stones into the magic array and defeating the demons that came out with every 10 darkness stones inserted. By the 70th darkness stone inserted, the demon that came out of the bottomless pit had become a level 65, Tier 3 Great Lord. However, with the help of the Bible of Darkness, Shifeng still managed to overwhelm his opponent. When Shifeng inserted the 80th darkness stone, the mental pressure the bottomless pit exerted on him caused even his consciousness to become a little blurry. If other players were standing in his place, they would have long since lost consciousness and been forcibly logged out of the game. With the insertion of the final darkness crystal, a horrific aura surged out from the bottomless pit and washed over the entire lost town, paralyzing Shifeng's body when it swept over him. Following which, the magic array covering the bottomless pit started rising into the sky and eventually vanished. Meanwhile, the top of the bottomless pit shrank rapidly, transforming into a small dot before disappearing without a trace as well. If other players were to visit the lost town in the future, they would not be able to tell that a massive hole had once existed in the middle of the town. After the bottomless pit disappeared, the mental pressure it exerted also faded away. When Shifeng's spirit had recovered, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, congratulations. You have completed the epic ranked main storyline quest Demon's Nest. Rewarding Lost Town's Town Order. System, congratulations. You have obtained the Lost Town's Town Order. Do you wish to bind the Lost Town to yourself and become its master? Upon hearing these system notifications, Shifeng breathed out an involuntary sigh of relief. Had he failed to complete the quest, he would have been hunted down by a Tier 5 Demon King. Aside from hiding in NPC cities, he would have had no chance of surviving anywhere else. Following which, Shifeng agreed to become the Lost Town's master. With this, the Lost Town officially became the first Town Zero Wing controlled in a neutral map. Once he constructed a guild residence here, guild members would be able to teleport freely to the Boneless Land without having to waste a lot of time on travel. Meanwhile, after he became the master of the town, the monsters originally present inside the town started vanishing one after another. Now, players could roam the town without worrying about monster attacks. In addition, all of the town's functions were made available to him. Around 30 seconds after the monsters had disappeared, NPCs suddenly started popping up all over the town, filling it with life. Meanwhile, Shifeng quickly made his way toward the main goal of his visit this time. The White Tower. Chapter 1703 Extraordinary Tower. Chapter 1703 Extraordinary Tower. Chapter 1703 Extraordinary Tower. The Lost Town's unique ability was the White Tower. After Shifeng had become the Lost Town's master, the defensive magic array protecting the White Tower also vanished. Now, the beam attacks didn't target him when he stood within 100 yards of the tower, and silver divine runes had begun to appear on the White Tower's walls, radiating faint divine might. When Shifeng reached the tower's entrance, a translucent screen appeared before him, introducing the White Tower. Extraordinary Tower. A training tower constructed by an ancient civilization. The tower has a total of 3 floors, each providing training that is more intense than the one before. Pass all 3 floors to qualify as an extraordinary individual. Removing the seal on the first floor requires 10,000 magic crystals. Maintaining its operation costs 500 magic crystals per day. Only 100 people are allowed to train at a time. Removing the seal on the second floor requires 100,000 magic crystals. Maintaining its operation costs 5,000 magic crystals per day. Only 50 people are allowed to train at a time. Removing the seal on the third floor requires 1 million magic crystals. Maintaining its operation costs 20,000 magic crystals per day. Only 10 people are allowed to train at a time. So, I guess there's a price. Shifeng could not help his bitter smile as he read the Extraordinary Tower's introductory text. Although he had known that the various superpowers in the past had paid a certain price to use their Lost Town's abilities, he hadn't expected the price to be so steep. The first floor's operation cost of 500 magic crystals wasn't much of a problem. It was the equivalent of charging 5 magic crystals per person per day. However, not only was the price for removing the second floor's seal 10 times that of the first floor, but its daily operation cost also increased by 10 times. This expenditure was even enough to drive first-rate guilds crazy. Furthermore, the number of training slots had been halved. It was the equivalent of charging 100 magic crystals per person per day. Meanwhile, super guilds would pale at the cost of unsealing and operating the third floor. Even a super guild would need a considerable time to accumulate the 1 million magic crystals needed to unseal the third floor, and the 20,000 magic crystal operation cost was simply outrageous. Most importantly, only 10 players could train on the third floor at the same time. Not even the current super guilds would dare to play with such a cost. It was the equivalent of spending 2,000 magic crystals for each player for a single day. Not even the word horrific was enough to describe this cost. However, after giving the matter some more thought, Shifeng found it reasonable. If players could reach the Void Realm and the higher realms of truth by paying a few hundred magic crystals, whoever controlled this lost town would become invincible. They could pump out batch after batch of peak experts for an insignificant price. It should be known that even though super guilds had complete legacies for the realms of refinement, the number of people they train at a time was very limited. Only the most talented would be chosen. This was because the training system's cost was simply too high. It was only reasonable that the Extraordinary Tower's operation costs would be so ridiculously high. It seems that I can only activate the first floor for now. After Shifeng finished reading the introduction, He undid the seal on the extraordinary tower's first floor. Although Zero Wing could not afford to unseal the second floor yet, it did not really matter. The first floor was more than enough for now. Aside from himself, no one in the guild had set foot in the realms of truth, after all. By the time a considerable number of guild members had reached the realms of truth, Zero Wing would have accumulated enough magic crystals to unseal the second floor. After Shifeng chose to unseal the first floor, 10,000 magic crystals vanished from his bag. At the same time, the extraordinary tower began to transform. As if the tower had awakened from its slumber, some of the divine runes on its walls brightened. The ambient mana then rapidly gathered around the tower, and more divine runes began to light up, continuously expanding its sphere of influence. Initially, the extraordinary tower only collected mana from its immediate area, gradually increasing that radius until it enveloped the lost town. It then reached past the town's boundaries to several thousand yards past the lost town's walls. What a powerful mana surge! Is this the lost town's true power? Shifeng was greatly shocked as he watched the flowing, white torrents of mana in the sky. Standing beside the extraordinary tower, Shifeng could feel the mana density around him rapidly increase. After absorbing mana for a short moment, the mana density around the tower could rival the magic tower, and it continued to rise. 1 minute. 3 minutes. 5 minutes. After around 10 minutes, the mana torrents began to fade. At this point, the divine runes covering the extraordinary tower shone brilliantly, giving the tower a sacred feeling. In addition, the lost town felt as if it had been resurrected as it brimmed with life. Grass, trees, and flowers grew rapidly all over the town. The mana density had also increased until it slightly surpassed the density in Stone Forest Town. One would find it very hard to believe that just some time ago, the lost town had been desolate. And this transformation was only the result of unsealing the first floor. Even Shifeng struggled to believe what he was seeing. If he undid all 3 of the extraordinary tower's seals, what would he see then? After calming his excited heart, Shifeng entered the extraordinary tower. As Shifeng stepped through its doors, he discovered that the tower's interior had undergone quite a few changes. The first floor had felt dull and old during his previous visit, but now, it looked impressive. Everything seemed to glow, and Shifeng felt like he stood in a sports arena's main hall, which could fit tens of thousands of people. Dazzling mana weapons were on display all around him. The sight was mesmerizing. God's domain's ancient civilizations were truly amazing. When Shifeng called up the first floor's system interface and examined its listed contents, he was ecstatic. He had only been able to visually inspect the dark environment during his previous visit to the tower's first floor. Even so, he had counted over 10,000 mana weapons. Now that he was the lost town's master, he could inspect any information related to the town. What he learned about the first floor made him realize that he still underestimated the strength and foundation of the ancient civilization that had once ruled over this land. Mana weapons were extremely rare in God's domain, but the first floor hall contained 24,671 of these weapons. There were enough mana weapons here to arm a 20,000-man army. The majority of the mana weapons here were Tier 1, with 1,823 Tier 2 mana weapons, and 12 Tier 3 mana weapons. To Shifeng's surprise, there were even 2 Tier 4 mana weapons in this hall. He was utterly stupefied. Even after learning about the Lost Town's unique ability, Shifeng had thought that the Demon's Nest quest had been more trouble than it was worth. If Primordial City hadn't activated, he would never have found a way to collect 100 Darkness Stones in time. But now that he had completed the quest and inspected the extraordinary tower's armory, he realized the Demon's Nest quest's reward was far beyond his expectations. Tier 4 mana weapons. Although only Tier 3 players and above could equip these weapons, they'd even perform better than fragmented legendary weapons. And this tower's first floor hall actually contained 2 Tier 4 mana weapons. When the guild's experts eventually reached Tier 3, he could help 2 of them become apex experts by arming them with these weapons. The upper echelon from an ordinary guild might not realize the benefit of 2 more apex experts, but Shifeng did. This meant that Zero Wing could occupy more towns and obtain even more resources. Zero Wing would not have to worry about lacking experts to protect its towns. I can't retrieve them. When Shifeng tried to collect the Tier 4 mana weapons through the system interface, the system informed him that he had yet to meet the requirement for such an action. To retrieve the two weapons, he had to promote the town to advanced rank. Shifeng could only shake his head and chuckle. Sure enough, the system won't let players obtain Tier 4 mana weapons so easily. However, Shifeng wasn't particularly disappointed. Developing the Lost Town was necessary regardless, and with Zero Wing's current foundations, upgrading the town from a basic town to an advanced town before the guild's experts reached Tier 3 wouldn't be a problem. Following which, Shifeng retrieved every Tier 3 and Tier 2 mana weapon available. This had been his main goal in visiting the Lost Town, after all. With these mana weapons, the strength of his guild's experts could undergo a qualitative transformation. This was especially true for the players who would wield the Tier 3 mana weapons. After retrieving the mana weapons, Shifeng followed the spiral staircase to the second floor. Previously, he had been focused on obtaining the magic crystal treasure chest. As a result, he hadn't inspected the tower's second or third floor. Now that he was the Lost Town's master, however, he had to examine the tower properly. Chapter 1704 Master's Power. Chapter 1704 Master's Power. Chapter 1704 Master's Power. Once he arrived on the extraordinary tower's second floor, Shifeng discovered that it was still as dilapidated as it had been during his first visit. However, the hall had brightened considerably, and now, Shifeng could clearly see the armored ghosts that wandered the floor. As he had left it, the tyrant's soul stood quietly before the spiral staircase leading to the third floor. It's still here. Shifeng frowned at the tyrant's soul. He had assumed that every monster in the Lost Town had disappeared when he had taken control of it, but it would seem that wasn't the case. At the very least, the monsters in the extraordinary tower hadn't been affected. He had already experienced the tyrant's soul's strength. Although it was only a level 80 mythic monster, it wielded a saint weapon, a Tier 5 mana weapon. In terms of combat power, even the demon ruler enhanced mythic ranked Baphomet paled in comparison to the tyrant's soul. Trying to defeat such a powerful foe was simply too difficult right now. Yet, if he left the tyrant's soul alone, the soul doppelganger would continue to hunt him. Although the soul doppelgangers wasn't an issue yet, since the most recent had only been a level 70 chieftain, they would grow stronger each day. They might not pose a threat right now, but sooner or later, they would become a problem. The only way to avoid the soul doppelganger's constant annoyance was to defeat the tyrant's soul. However, slaying the tyrant's soul was easier said than done. Just the fact that it was a level 80 mythic monster made it challenging enough, not to mention its saint weapon. Even a 100-man team of Tier 2 experts might fail to take it down, not to mention Shifeng. No, that's not right. This is the extraordinary tower. As the master of the Lost Town, every construction within the town should be under my control. The tower should not be an exception. Thinking so, Shifeng opened the extraordinary tower's system interface. In God's domain, players had full control of the buildings they owned. This meant that players had access to various functions, such as a building's governing mechanics and removing players from the building. Because of this, players in God's domain wouldn't cause trouble in other guilds and players' private properties, as doing so would put them at an overwhelming disadvantage. Without overwhelming strength, it was impossible to defeat a property's owner inside their own building. The extraordinary tower should be considered private property. It wasn't like a guild residence, which was owned by the guild, not an individual. In the case of shared properties like guild residences, the most players could do to ensure the residence's security was hire players and NPC guards to protect it. The residences didn't have an automated function to expel intruders. Sure enough, I can control the tower. Shifeng rejoiced when he discovered that he could manipulate the extraordinary tower's system interface. Immediately, he retrieved the Bible of Darkness and a Summon Guard scroll. Shortly after, a Tier 3 Tomahawk demon and Anna appeared before Shifeng. Dealing with the 9 wandering souls would be difficult enough for the level 80, Tier 3 demon and a Tier 2 NPC like Anna, let alone facing off against the mythic ranked tyrant soul. The 9 wandering souls were all level 80 Grand Lords, and if they worked together, they could easily overwhelm Anna and the Tier 3 demon. However, Shifeng did not mind. He then instructed Anna summon her Golden Giant and Rock Guardians. Anna's actions immediately attracted the tyrant soul's attention, and the mythic monster abruptly opened its eyes. "Despicable thief! You dare to show yourself before me again? I will tear your soul to pieces." The tyrant soul quickly recognized Shifeng's aura, its eyes glowing red with rage. It bellowed with fury and vanished. Meanwhile, the wandering souls turned to charge at Shifeng. Even Shifeng grew nervous while facing a level 80 mythic monster and 9 level 80 Grand Lords. Seal. Not daring to be careless, Shifeng immediately utilized his special privilege as the tower's owner. Suddenly, countless chains appeared around the tyrant's soul and wandering souls. Following which, the 10 monsters' basic attributes plummeted, falling to 50% of their original values in the blink of an eye. They couldn't use their skills or spells, either. Suppressed, the tyrant's soul was forcefully revealed. The Tier 3 Tomahawk Demon then charged at the tyrant's soul. Seeing this, the tyrant's soul wielded its blue lightning blade and swung it at the Tomahawk Demon's battle axe. When the two weapons clashed, a storm began to brew in the hall. The impact also forced the Tomahawk Demon to retreat by 3 steps, its battle axe slightly vibrating. Surprisingly, the tyrant's soul had also slid back 4 steps, the lightning blade in its hands instantly shattering. Although the two monsters had only clashed once, the difference in their strengths was obvious. The demon ruler enhanced Tomahawk Demon definitely triumphed over the tyrant's soul. Fortunately, the 10 rock giants were able to hold back the 10 Grand Lord ranked wandering souls by themselves. This allowed the Golden Giant to join the Tomahawk Demon against the tyrant's soul. Meanwhile, Anna continuously bombarded the tyrant's soul with Tier 2 spells. Naturally, Shifeng didn't hold back either as he charged into the fight. With the Tomahawk Demon and Golden Giant serving as MTS, fighting the tyrant's soul became very easy. Shifeng was able to deal around -6,000 damage with his normal attacks, while his skills dealt damage in the tens of thousands. Although his damage couldn't compare to Anna and the 2 Tier 3 summoned creatures, who dealt hundreds of thousands of damage, he still helped to shave away the tyrant's soul's HP. Following which, the tyrant's soul received a one-sided beating as its HP continued to drop. 98%. 95%. 90%. Eventually, the tyrant's soul became thoroughly enraged and tried to summon its saint weapon, but despite chanting the incantation, the saint weapon was nowhere to be seen. As a result, it could only watch helplessly as its HP decreased. With its basic attributes heavily suppressed and unable to use its spells and skills, the tyrant's soul was likely the most miserable mythic monster in the game right now. Not even the system had expected Shifeng to accomplish the near-impossible feat of collecting 100 darkness stones and acquire the lost town before dealing with the extraordinary tower's boss. However, as a result of Shifeng's unconventional way of acquiring the lost town, the tyrant's soul couldn't use its abilities. This was especially true for its saint weapon. If the tyrant's soul were at its peak and had the aid of a Tier 5 mana weapon, not even the Tier 4 Valkyrie would be its match. One could just imagine how powerful the tyrant's soul truly was. It was definitely invincible among those of the same level. Unfortunately, the tyrant's soul couldn't use its skills or spells, let alone summon its saint weapon. Although the tyrant's soul had a maximum HP of 210 million even after the suppression, its HP fell steadily under Shifeng and his minions' assault. 80%. 50%. 20%. Time passed quickly, and eventually, the tyrant's soul's HP fell to 20%. Due to the rough battle, the monster's armor was now in tatters. However, despite losing most of its HP, the tyrant's soul could only use normal attacks. It couldn't even go berserk like normal monsters did after their HP reached a certain point. Finally, after over 30 minutes, the tyrant's soul's HP fell below the 1%. Shifeng then activated Divine Providence and arrived beside the mythic monster. His swords transformed into streaks of dazzling light that tore through the tyrant's soul's unguarded side. Flame burst. Damages exceeding -60,000 appeared above the tyrant's soul's head, one after another. By the time Shifeng had exhausted all of Flame Burst's 16 attacks, the tyrant's soul's HP had reached 0. The mythic monster released an agonizing scream before transforming into particles of light and disappearing. To Shifeng's disappointment, the tyrant's soul had only dropped its dilapidated armor pieces and 2 items. However, Shifeng heard the sound of a system notification after the tyrant's soul had died, and when he heard its message, he was stunned. System: congratulations. You have slain the tyrant's soul. Rewarding a town building order. Chapter 1705 Mana Equipment Set. Chapter 1705 Mana Equipment Set. Chapter 1705 Mana Equipment Set. A town building order? Shifeng's mind blanked for a moment when he saw the tattered parchment that had abruptly appeared in his hands. Town building orders were incredibly precious in God's domain. Normally, the item could only be obtained from securing the first kill of a special field boss or epic ranked or higher group quest. A town building order was far more valuable than a captured town. This was because the town building order granted players the freedom to build a town in almost any location they desired. They could even construct the town in a neutral map. This was where the town building order truly shined. Neutral maps didn't have teleportation points, and players had to rely on their own feet to reach these maps. Moreover, very few neutral maps contained towns or cities. In the case of the Orc Empire, capturable towns and cities had only appeared due to an expansion pack. Trying to find a pre-made town to capture in other neutral maps was a dream. Of course, the Orc Empire's natural towns and cities had their flaws. They lacked some of the functions that normal guild towns and cities possessed. For example, they couldn't be promoted. Regardless of how well guilds managed these towns and cities, they would remain at the same rank they started with. Meanwhile, the town constructed with a town building order didn't have such restrictions. It could be promoted into a city without issues. However, one had to pay a considerably higher price to use a town building order in a neutral map. It would cost, at the very least, several, possibly dozens of times more than building a town within a kingdom or empire. This was because neutral maps were not considered safe areas. In fact, they were home to many races that were hostile to humans. Naturally, setting up a town in enemy land would be more costly. The higher leveled the neutral map was, the more it would cost to construct a town there. Most importantly, guild towns and cities in neutral maps would face frequent monster attacks. Surviving in these neutral maps would also be much harder than within a kingdom or empire's borders. Hence, not all guilds that had been lucky enough to find a town building order had chosen to construct their towns in neutral maps. Rather, they lacked the ability and funds to build a town in a neutral map. Shifeng had never expected to obtain a town building order so soon in this life. Originally, he had planned to wait for the guild's main force to reach level 60 before challenging a few special field bosses that he knew the locations of. But now, he had a town building order 10 levels earlier than expected. Forget it. It's better to get one earlier than later. At most, I'll just have to adjust my original plan. Shifeng smiled before storing the town building order. He then set his sights on the other items the tyrant's soul had dropped while he had Anna and the tier 3 demon clean up the remaining monsters. As a mythic monster, the tyrant's soul should have dropped a lot of items. Yet, the boss had a surprisingly low number. Including the tattered equipment the tyrant's soul dropped, the boss had only dropped 6 items. Shifeng immediately picked up the tattered equipment pieces and inspected them. These equipment pieces had clearly existed for an extremely long time. Many areas of the pieces had fallen prey to corrosion. If they were tossed to the roadside, nobody would likely spare them a second glance. However, Shifeng was instantly ecstatic after he inspected their attribute panels. Mana equipment, as expected of the extraordinary tower's guardian boss. Shifeng's eyes glowed with excitement as he gazed at the 4 tattered pieces of equipment before him. Mana equipment was similar to mana weapons. Both were consumables and could offer a significant boost to players' combat power. Only, mana equipment was extremely difficult to produce, far more so than mana weapons. As a result, mana equipment was scarcer than mana weapons. Meanwhile, the 4 pieces of mana equipment before him made up a complete set. They were the hands, chest, legs, and boots of the Judgment set, a Tier 2 mana equipment set. Individually, these 4 pieces had the basic attributes to rival epic equipment. Only, they did not possess any additional skills. In return for their lack of skills, though, the 4-piece Judgment set included 2 ridiculously strong set effects. 2-piece set effect, mana stimulation, passively improves physique by 30% and reaction speed by 20%. Forms a mana shield around the wearer that weakens spell effects by 50% and reduces physical damage received by 30%. 4-piece set effect, Light of Judgment, stimulates the runes on every set piece at the cost of durability. When active, increases all attributes by 800 points, strength by 90%, endurance by 60%, and agility by 60%. Sustaining Light of Judgment reduces 1 durability point from every set piece each minute. The mana equipment set's attributes rendered Shifeng speechless. Although he had been a guild leader in the past, his guild had only been a second-rate guild. The information he had been able to get his hands on had been very limited. Although he had known that mana equipment was very powerful, he hadn't realized exactly how powerful. Now that he had seen one of these set's attributes, he finally understood why mana equipment was so powerful. The basic attributes it provided could rival epic equipment of the same level, and when operating at maximum capacity, its buffs were even more impressive than a berserk skill. An 800-point increase to all attributes was simply unimaginable for Tier 2 players. Both the berserk skills that players learned and those from equipment generally only boosted the player's basic attributes. In other words, the higher a player's basic attributes were, the more effective their berserk skills would be. Meanwhile, when level 60, Tier 2 experts used a berserk skill, excluding the percentage buffs from weapons and equipment, they would generally gain around 1,300 to 1,500 points to their main attribute. The boost to the other basic attributes was far smaller. Yet, Judgment of Light offered a fixed increase of 800 points to every basic attribute. That was the equivalent of a level 60, Tier 2 expert gaining 50% or higher boost to their attributes. After including the percentage buffs Judgment of Light provided, the player's overall improvement would be terrifying. Shifeng even suspected that he could gain as much strength with Judgment of Light as he did from Heavenly Dragon's power, which was above average compared to other berserk skills. It was a pity that the Judgment set was a class-specific set equipment and could only be used by Guardian Knights. If Kola equipped this set, he should even be able to tank mythic monsters of the same level. Shifeng began to fantasize as he examined the Judgment set. If Kola wore the Judgment set with his Titan Guard, he'd become the strongest MT in God's domain. Following which, Shifeng stored the mana equipment set and set his sights on the last 2 items the Tyrant's Soul had dropped. One of them was an old key, while the other was a Tier 4 magic scroll. The Tier 4 magic scroll was a Tier 4 domain scroll, and the key would unlock the magic crystal treasure chest on the tower's top floor. Since he had stolen some of the treasure chest's contents during his last visit, the Tyrant's Soul had learned its lesson and locked it, making it impossible for Shifeng, or anyone for that matter, to steal any more items. Now that Shifeng had the key, though, he could open the treasure chest and retrieve the remaining items. Previously, he hadn't had much time to loot the treasure chest, and in the end, he had only claimed 5 items. However, every one of those 5 items could even invoke a super guild's envy. Shifeng and his minions then dealt with the remaining 9 wandering souls and collected 15 pieces of level 70 secret silver and fine gold equipment before he made his way to the tower's top floor. The magic crystal treasure chest hadn't moved from its original position. However, the chest now sported a massive, golden padlock. A single glance told Shifeng had no hope of destroying the lock as he was now, but after using the key, he removed the lock in 5 seconds. Lifting the treasure chest's lid, an aurora of light escaped, which was so dazzling that anyone could see it from anywhere in the lost town. Sure enough, this chest still has a lot of treasures. Feng's heart pounded with excitement as he looked at the 6 items inside the treasure chest. He immediately began to appraise them, one after another. Of the 6 items, 3 were Tier 2 skill books, 1 was a Tier 2 taboo skill for assassins called Indiscriminate Killing, 1 was a Tier 2 spell for elementalists called Elemental Mirror, and 1 was a Tier 2 passive skill for rangers called Precision Shooting. The other 3 items included a Tier 3 mana staff, a magic tower design, and the last was the Guardian Puppet design. It's no wonder why the players and powers that obtained gold magic crystal treasure chests had never said a word about their harvest. So, this is why. Realization dawned on Feng when he saw the Guardian Puppet design. He had wondered what made the gold magic crystal treasure chests so special that almost no player or power had ever mentioned obtaining one during his previous life. None of the 5 items he had gained during his first visit were enough to tempt a super guild to put everything it had into obtaining one of these treasure chests. However, after taking a look at the Guardian Puppet design, he understood. This Guardian Puppet design alone was many times more valuable than every other item in the gold magic crystal treasure chest. It was so valuable that superpowers would wage an all-out war with each other to obtain it. Chapter 1706, Guild Treasure. Chapter 1706, Guild Treasure. Looking at the Guardian Puppet design in his hands, Feng could not help but inhale deeply as he began scrutinizing it. In the past, Guardian Puppets were something exclusive to the various superpowers and an extreme few large guilds. Every Guardian Puppet was treated as a priceless treasure and was the symbol of a guild's foundations. Almost nobody would choose to sell their Guardian Puppet unless absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, the ones that got sold had been furiously contested over by countless powers. The Guardian Puppet had been in great demand because it was ancient technology that had been lost in time. Without a proper design, players couldn't replicate the technology since the production of the Guardian Puppet involved too many fields of study such as alchemy, forging, and engineering. Moreover, every subclass had to be at the master rank at the very minimum. Only after gathering the masters of these subclasses could players produce a Guardian Puppet. However, according to rumors, just the materials needed for one production attempt cost over 2,000 gold, far more expensive than making a slightly below-average piece of epic equipment. The final cost for making the Guardian Puppet would simply be unimaginable. Meanwhile, the reason why the Guardian Puppet was so valuable was its frightening combat power. Even a level 0 player could instantly become a monster-like existence with the help of the Guardian Puppet. It was a war weapon that no epic item or even fragmented legendary item could compare to. To a guild, the Guardian Puppet was a priceless treasure. In the past, there were some first-rate guilds that dared to provoke even superpowers yet managed to live to tell the tale. The secret behind their survival was their possession of Guardian Puppets. Even an ordinary Guardian Puppet had the combat power of a Tier 3 existence. Meanwhile, the Guardian Puppet design Feng currently held in his hands was for bronze-ranked Guardian Puppets. The bronze Guardian Puppet possessed strength at the peak of Tier 3, and any player controlling the puppet could wield this strength as if it was their own. Moreover, unlike summoned creatures, which would disappear after a certain duration, Guardian Puppets would not disappear unless destroyed. Regardless of how far players developed in God's domain, combat power at the peak of Tier 3 would never become obsolete, because many players could not even reach Tier 3. As expected of a bronze Guardian Puppet. Just the materials needed for one production attempt cost over 3,000 gold. Moreover, a master forger would only have a 30% success rate at completing the forging portion. The success of the final assembly isn't even guaranteed. It's no wonder the various superpowers treated their puppets like their own babies. Feng was inwardly astonished as he looked at the list of required materials stated on the design. However, after giving the matter some thought, he found the price to be reasonable. The bronze Guardian Puppet possessed combat power at the peak of Tier 3 and could be used indefinitely. If a guild could produce several hundred of these puppets now, it would basically be invincible. After all, there was no level requirement for controlling a Guardian Puppet. The only limiting factor was one's skillfulness at controlling the puppet. It seems there's a need to place greater focus on Candlelight's development. Shifeng could not wait for the day Zero Wing could have its own guardian puppets. Although the materials needed to produce the bronze guardian puppet were rare, aside from the main material, fine titan ingot, the other materials could be collected in bulk relatively easily. The main problem was the requirement of various kinds of lifestyle masters. Without the necessary lifestyle masters, the odds of producing the guardian puppet were zero. If Zero Wing could mass-produce bronze guardian puppets, whether it was in team battles or siege battles, they would become a formidable support since they dealt increased damage to magic arrays and buildings. Moreover, they were much more powerful than Tier 3 summoned creatures. Just as Shifeng was figuring out ways to further improve the standards of lifestyle players in the Candlelight Trading Firm, he suddenly received a call from Gentle Snow. Guild Leader, I just received good news. Heaven's Burial's Singular Burial and Lei Jingyang fell out with each other. The guild has already been disbanded. However, Singular Burial joined Blackwater with some of his trusted aides and guild experts. Currently, Singular Burial is bringing his men to the primordial divine ruin. By the looks of it, they plan on reaching Primordial City by relying on various resources Blackwater provided them, Gentle Snow said, smiling. Heaven's Burial's destruction was something she and the rest of Zero Wing's upper echelon had anticipated. Only, they had not expected Heaven's Burial to disband so quickly. Caught off guard, they had a hard time taking over the shops located in the various cities Heaven's Burial ruled before, many of which were snatched away by other guilds. However, Heaven's Burial's sudden disbandment also saved Zero Wing plenty of trouble. At the very least, there was no longer any need to wage price wars with Heaven's Burial's shops in Star Moon Kingdom, nor was there any need to dispatch larger armies to capture Heaven's Burial's guild towns. So, they've given up on Star Moon Kingdom and are shifting their focus to Primordial City. Shifeng could not help but chuckle. Looking at Gentle Snow, he asked, have you gathered the necessary manpower yet? As you've requested, I personally contacted every one of the selected candidates and had them secretly gather at Zero Wing City. Currently, we're just short by a few dozen people before we have the required number, Gentle Snow replied. Good. Have them gather at Zero Wing City's Candlelight Trading Firm. I'll head over there myself right now. It's about time we gave Beast Emperor and Singular Burial a little surprise, Shifeng said with a nod before disconnecting the call. Even now, Gentle Snow still had no idea what Shifeng intended to do by summoning 1,500 experts. However, she continued notifying the selected experts to gather at Zero Wing City's Candlelight Trading Firm. Meanwhile, after ending the call, Shifeng spent 3,000 gold to have the NPCs in the Lost Town construct a guild residence. At the same time, he hired 100 level 150, Tier 2 NPC guards and 1,000 level 150, Tier 1 NPC guards for town defense. With this, the town should have no problems fending off monster attacks in the short term. Once that was done, he took out a guild transfer scroll and teleported to Zero Wing City's residence. After the heaven-defying battle at Stone Forest Town, the number of players visiting Zero Wing City each day had skyrocketed. Now, the city's player population had already shot past the 4 million mark. Just the entrance fees collected each day totaled roughly 22,000 gold. Not to mention, there was still the income from Stone Forest Town, the Candlelight Trading Firm, and many other enterprises. Now that there was no longer any need to continue placing bounties on Heaven's Burial's members, all that income could be invested into the guild's development. Meanwhile, even after including the guild's various expenses such as providing guild benefits and the guild's expansion, Zero Wing still saved up around 15,000 gold per day. This income could make any first-rate guild crazy with jealousy. For first-rate guilds, just being able to get their guild to operate normally was already a challenging task. Moreover, the guild benefits they offered their members weren't even comparable to Zero Wing's. It would not be an exaggeration to say that no first-rate guild in God's domain could compete with Zero Wing in terms of wealth. After returning to Zero Wing's residence, Shifeng first went to the guild warehouse to retrieve some materials obtained from team dungeons and through trading with the various first-rate guilds. Then, he started producing magic array scrolls for the Divine Beast's Descent magic array. Once he completed 2 sets, He took out the 2 remaining elemental sources from his bag and combined them with the magic array scrolls. Suddenly, the 2 sets of magic array scrolls started evolving. Originally, Divine Beast's Descent was an intermediate magic array, but after the fusion was completed, the magic arrays exuded an aura that was even more powerful than advanced magic arrays. Following which, Shifeng stored the 2 sets of magic array scrolls and left for the candlelight trading firm. By the time he arrived at Zero Wing City's candlelight trading firm, Gentle Snow and the others were already waiting for him. Currently, the lounge on the 2nd floor was filled with players, every one of whom was curiously wondering why their vice guild leaders had gathered them here today. However, when they saw Shifeng, who was currently disguised as Black Flame, enter the lounge, the entire room suddenly fell silent. Guild leader? Why is the guild leader here? Were we gathered here today under the guild leader's orders? Everyone in the lounge could not help but discuss Shifeng's sudden appearance, excited expressions on their faces. I believe you all must have heard that our brothers stationed over at the primordial divine ruin have been surrounded and killed by evil demons and evil beasts. In fact, Beast Emperor, the person controlling those monsters, has even announced that Zero Wing's members are forbidden from setting foot into the primordial divine ruin, and any who dare do so will be killed without question. Although that place isn't our guild's territory, I feel that we should still make a response. Hence, I have gathered you all here today so that we can prepare a surprise for Beast Emperor and his allies. We are going to destroy every evil beast and evil demon present near the primordial divine ruin. We will let the various major powers know that Zero Wing is not a pushover. When Shifeng was done speaking, gasps filled the entire venue. Even Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose, who stood beside Shifeng, could not help but turn to look at their guild leader, both of them thinking that Shifeng had lost his mind. Destroy every evil beast and evil demon present near the primordial divine ruin? How can such a feat possibly be accomplished? Chapter 1707, Tier 2 Legion. Chapter 1707, Tier 2 Legion. Chapter 1707, Tier 2 Legion. The silence persisted for a short moment before a commotion erupted inside the lounge. Everyone felt that Shifeng's intentions were too crazy. Setting aside how many evil beasts and evil demons were present around the primordial divine ruin, just the mythic evil beasts and mythic evil demons, there would be more than enough to annihilate their team of 1,500 players. Not to mention, they were attacking in enemy territory, which meant plenty of enemy reinforcements. I'm sure you all are worried and afraid. If you feel that you are not up to it, you may leave. I won't force any of you to take part in this operation. After all, the operation this time is indeed very dangerous. If you wish to take part in it, though, come to me to register. Note that you will also have to sign a confidentiality contract to take part in this operation, Shifeng said in a calm tone after carefully observing everyone present. The reason why Zero Wing was contesting with other guilds over various resources was to provide its members with better benefits. Meanwhile, the majority of the resources obtained would go to elite and core members of the guild. If the guild's core members were not even willing to put themselves at risk for the guild, then when the guild faced greater pressure in the future, nobody would know what kind of actions these core members would take. Thus, there was naturally no need for the guild to continue nurturing such ungrateful core members. Previously, when Zero Wing was still in its infancy, he could tolerate feeding the guild's elite and expert members without asking much in return. However, now that Zero Wing was no longer in its infancy and had already stepped onto the path of becoming a superpower, the guild would need much more resources than before to continue developing. His latest acquisition, the Lost Town, only made the guild even more desperate for resources. Now, he could neither afford nor tolerate having freeloaders in his guild. Hence, there was a serious need to adjust the way the guild operated. The first thing he was going to change was how benefits were offered to guild members. A guild member's contribution would now also be an important criterion in deciding what kind of benefits they would receive. Strength was no longer the only determining factor. The more a person contributed to the guild, the more returns they would receive. In the past, many large guilds had failed to pay attention to this aspect and simply focused on recruiting strong players without bothering with whether those players were truly loyal to the guild or not. As a result, When the guild faced an insurmountable foe, it crumbled even before the battle had begun. In contrast, some small guilds with average strength were able to unite their members to fight against first-rate guilds and maintain a considerably large territory for themselves. Shifeng planned to institute the changes starting with this operation. After he was done speaking, everyone present fell into a daze for a while. At this time, Gentle Snow, Aqua Rose, and the other core members in the upper echelon of the guild quickly realized what Shifeng was trying to do. Hence, they kept their mouths shut and quietly watched from the sides. "We'll definitely get ourselves killed by going over there. Wonderful. I've been itching to let those bastards know Zero Wing's amazingness. Guild leader, just give us our orders." For a time, everyone present discussed among themselves. The members of the guild's main force then went up to Shifeng to register. Only a small number of players that were recently promoted into Dark Gods members hesitated over their decision. After the registration process continued for around a dozen minutes, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose could not help but breathe out a sigh of relief. Of the 1,500 players they gathered, over 1,400 had registered to join the operation, with only several dozen players declining. However, this situation also served as a stern reminder to the two of them. The players they had gathered here today were all experts who they believed were trustworthy, yet there were still some people that had betrayed their expectations. If they were to conduct such a test for the other expert and elite members, the percentage of those who would abandon the guild during its time of need would most likely be much higher. Meanwhile, many more expert and elite players would be joining the guild in the future. There are over 1,400 people remaining. Shifeng was quite satisfied with this outcome, which could also be considered the result of the past few selections Zero Wing had conducted. Not to mention, most of the members that chose to abstain from the operation this time were mainly recent recruits. Following which, he turned to look at Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow and said quietly, "From today onward, start restructuring the guild ranks. Regardless if one is an expert member or an elite member, their positions are not fixed. If members fail to obtain a sufficient number of guild achievements and guild contribution points corresponding to their rank each month, they'll be demoted by a rank. I don't care how strong they are, they can be demoted all the way to a guild reserve member and eventually kicked out of the guild." Upon hearing Shifeng's words, Gentle Snow and Aqua Rose nodded in agreement, both of them thinking that it was about time for them to make new guild regulations. After all, the current Zero Wing was no longer the same Zero Wing as before. Previously, as Zero Wing was lacking manpower and was constantly waging war with other guilds, they had no choice but to offer excellent and tempting benefits with lax conditions in order to keep the guild alive. In contrast, first-rate guilds got to develop in a stable environment for long periods. Not only were their rules and regulations clearly defined, but their contribution and achievement systems were also perfected. This allowed them to prevent freeloaders from appearing in their guilds. After everyone signed the confidentiality contract, Shifeng distributed Tier 2 mana weapons to all the Tier 1 players present. As for Aqua Rose, Gentle Snow, and the other Tier 2 experts there, Shifeng handed them Tier 3 mana weapons. This situation stupefied Shadow Sword, who currently wielded the Tier 3 mana weapon Edgeless Blade. He had experienced the strength of a Tier 3 mana weapon for himself. Even if he simply wielded the weapon normally, he could exert power at the Tier 3 standard. If he pushed the weapon to its maximum potential, then he was basically an unstoppable god of slaughter. Meanwhile, for the operation this time, a total of 12 Tier 2 players would be taking part in it, yet Shifeng had actually given every one of them a Tier 3 mana weapon. Shadow Sword found this situation to be simply incredible. However, the most frightening matter would still have to be the fact that every one of the Tier 1 experts present received a Tier 2 mana weapon. That was over 1,400 players they were talking about. In other words, at this moment, Zero Wing had essentially gained an additional 1,400 plus Tier 2 experts. With the correct conditions, a 100-man team of Tier 2 experts could definitely raid a mythic boss of the same level. Meanwhile, like Shadow Sword, after Aqua Rose and the others took a look at the attributes of their respective Tier 3 mana weapons, they were similarly dumbfounded. "Guild leader, did you raid the armory of a kingdom?" We won't get hunted by some kingdom's army, right? Blackie could not help but gulp nervously as he looked at the Tier 3 mana staff he held, which completely surpassed his epic ranked staff in terms of raw power. The other Tier 2 experts nodded their heads, seconding Blackie's words. They never thought that their guild actually possessed such a hidden hand. Even those in the upper echelon like themselves were utterly clueless about this. Just by holding the Tier 3 mana weapons, they could feel that their combat power had increased drastically. At the very least, the raw power of their attacks should be at the Tier 3 standard already. Although they did not possess the physique and skills of a Tier 3 player, they were still confident that, unless their opponent was fully geared in epic equipment, they could easily stomp on any Tier 2 expert right now. At this moment, Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow finally understood why Chiffon would try to annihilate the evil beasts and evil demons around the primordial divine ruin with such a small number of players. With so many experts boasting Tier 2 and Tier 3 combat power, they indeed possessed the qualifications to go up against the evil demons and evil beasts near the primordial divine ruin. While everyone was reeling from receiving the mana weapons, Chiffon took out 4 pieces of equipment and handed them to Cola. Originally, Cola wanted to say that his equipment was plenty excellent already and that there was no need for a replacement. However, once he inspected what Chiffon gave him, his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Without hesitation, he removed the level 50 Feingold set equipment he was wearing and replaced them with the mana equipment set from Chiffon. The moment Cola equipped the mana equipment set, the feeling he gave off transformed abruptly. Right now, Cola's aura gave even Aqua Rose and Gentle Snow intense pressure. Not to mention, the mana in the room was also surging toward him. Just standing beside the Guardian Knight felt stifling. Guild leader, what kind of equipment did you give Cola? Did you give him 4 pieces of epic equipment? Gentle Snow asked curiously. At this moment, she could clearly feel that her attributes were inferior to Cola's. However, she currently had a piece of fragmented legendary equipment equipped, so it was simply unbelievable that Cola's basic attributes would be superior to hers. The only explanation she could think of for such a difference was that Cola had just equipped 4 pieces of epic equipment. No. It's Tier 2 mana equipment set. It's something similar to the mana weapons you all are using, Chiffon replied, shaking his head. He then turned to Cola and asked, how does it feel after you've equipped it? Guild leader, this set is simply insane. I feel that I can tank even a mythic boss right now. Cola's eyes glowed with excitement as he looked at the 4 silvery pieces of equipment on him. When the surrounding crowd heard Cola's words, they could not help but gasp. From Cola's expression, they could tell that the Guardian Knight was not joking at all. However, realizing this only served to shock them even more. 4 pieces of mana equipment were actually enough to create an MT capable of tanking a mythic boss of the same level. This situation was simply too frightening. Relax. You'll have plenty of chances to show off later on, Chiffon said, chuckling. Following which, Chiffon had Aqua Rose recruit 176 trustworthy summoners from the guild's elite members for the upcoming operation and had them sign confidentiality contracts as well. Move out. Our target is the primordial divine ruin. It's about time we let our enemies pay the price of blood, Chiffon commanded after seeing that everyone had gathered. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,